Hello, how's it going everyone? I just wanted to say that I just created a Discord server. If you want to join it, you're more than welcome. You can find the link in the description of this video. We're building a portfolio website. This portfolio has 7 sections, a header, a hero, an about, a featured project, more projects, a contact section, and a footer. The website is entirely responsive, mobile first, and only has 6 breakpoints: 475 pixels, 640 pixels, 768 pixels, 1024 pixels, 1280 pixels, 1536 pixels. Clicking on the sun icon lets us toggle between light mode and dark mode. We're using local storage to save the theme, so if I reload the page, we see we're still in light mode, and if I switch to dark mode and reload the page, we see we're still in dark mode. Scrolling down the page, we see the images below the fold are all lazy loaded and are all accompanied with a blur animation. Towards the end of this video, we push our code into a GitHub repository and then we deploy the website to the World Wide Web using Vercel. If you want to look at the website yourself, you can find the link in the description of this video. Before we start, if you don't already have Node.js installed, then you're going to have to install it. Head over to nodejs.org and download the LTS version. Second, if you don't already have Git and Git Bash installed, then you need to install them. Head over to git-scm.com and click on Download for Windows. Finally, if you're on Windows, the default command prompt and PowerShell terminal are just not good enough. Open your Microsoft Store, search for Windows Terminal, install it, and open it. Click on the small arrow and select Settings. Scroll down and click on Add New Profile. Click on New Empty Profile and change the name to Git Bash. On the Command Line tab, click on Browse, enter into your local disk, and open Program Files. Find the Git folder and open it. Open the bin folder and select Bash. Change the default directory to whatever you want. I'll select my desktop. For the icon, go back to the Git folder inside your program files, go in the Ming W64 folder, go in the Share folder, go in the Git folder, and select the Git for Windows icon. Click on Save and go back to the Startup section. Change the default profile to Git Bash, save, and close everything. Click on Start, and you should see the terminal app in the Recently Added. I'll drag it into my taskbar for easy access. Open it, and if your terminal looks like this with the title of Ming W64, then you did everything correctly. You can close it again for now. Usually, I would create a folder somewhere in my computer, add an HTML file, add a CSS file, and maybe add a JavaScript file. Building a website like this is fine, but you're missing out on some powerful features. Instead, what we can do is use a tool like Vite to automatically set up our development environment. Vite is a build tool that will generate the index.html, style.css, and main.js for us. Plus, it comes with additional features that we don't get when we set things up manually ourselves. Vite is not a framework, it's not a library. There is nothing to learn, and we'll still be working with normal HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The only reason I want to use it is for the features that it provides. On the Vite website, we can click on Get Started and then click on Features. We can see here, Vite provides us with many features. Some noteworthy ones are NPM dependency resolving and pre-bundling. This allows us to use bare module imports, which normally isn't supported, and then it pre-bundles the imports using ESBuild. Hot module replacement. If you've ever used Live Server on VS Code, this is pretty much the same thing, but on steroids. It's 1,000,000 times faster. There's also many more features like CSS code splitting and general build optimizations. To bootstrap our project, I'm going to click on Getting Started, scroll down slightly, and copy the npm create vite command. On my desktop, I can right-click and select Open in Terminal. If you don't see this option, you can just search for it in the taskbar and open it like this. If you were following along, when I installed the terminal, I set the default starting directory on my terminal to be my desktop, and we can see that this is the case by entering the pwd command. We see the terminal is currently in the desktop directory, which is where I want to be. Now in here, I can paste the command that I copied from the Vite website and press enter. It's asking us to enter a project name. I'll call it Portfolio and press enter. It's now asking us to select a framework. We don't want to use a JavaScript framework, so we're going to select Vanilla and press enter. We can choose between JavaScript and TypeScript. I'll choose JavaScript. Our project was created. All we have to do is cd into our project, npm install the packages, and npm run dev to test out the dev server. We see everything is working. So I'll close this and I'll also kill the terminal by pressing Ctrl C. To enter VS Code from here, I can type code, space, dot, and press enter. With VS Code open, I don't need my terminal anymore, so I'll just close it. Also, from now on, if I ever need to use the terminal, I can just use the one VS Code comes with by pressing Ctrl and backtick. Using Vite automatically created the index.html, the style.css, and the main.js for us. Inside the style.css, I'm going to delete everything. Inside the main.js, I'm also going to delete everything except the first line. Usually, you would import your CSS files as a link tag in the HTML, but with Vite, we import our CSS files in our JavaScript like this. Inside the index.html, I'm going to replace the title with portfolio and I'll delete the div with the ID of app. Actually, instead of saying portfolio in the title, I'll say dev server. We'll change this back to portfolio towards the end of this video, but for now, I want the title to be dev server. Vite also created a few files that we just don't need, like counter.js, which we can delete, and the javascript.svg, which we can also delete. Now, for organizational purposes, I'm going to create a new folder called styles and move our style.css inside it. I'll also create a source folder and move our main.js inside it. I'll keep the index.html in the root directory. Because we moved our files around, we need to update their location where we're importing them. In our index.html, we need to update the location of our main.js. Main.js is located inside the source folder, so I can just add /source. In the main.js, we need to update the location of our style.css. Style.css is located inside the styles folder, so the route to it is ... because we need to leave the source folder, then /styles/style.css. To run our development server, we can open the terminal with Ctrl and backtick and type npm run dev. Now, before I press enter, how do I know that this is the command to open the development server? We have a file called package.json. Inside it, we see there's a bunch of information about our project like name, private, version, and type. At the bottom, we see our dependencies. We only have Vite installed. And we have the scripts. We've got 3 scripts, dev, build, and preview. To run a script, we open the terminal and type npm run and the script we want to run. If I say npm run dev, it runs Vite. If I say npm run build, it runs Vite build. And if I say npm run preview, it will run Vite preview. Vite is the development server, so when I run npm run dev, this launches a server with hot module replacement, and when we go there on our browser, any code we write will be reflected on the browser. So for example, in the index.html, I can add an h1 of hello world, save, and we see now we've got the hello world heading in our browser. I'll go over Vite build and Vite preview later in the video. We're almost ready to start building our portfolio. I'm going to do a Google search for modern normalize. All this does is creates consistency in styles across all the modern browsers. Browsers have default styles for various HTML elements, and these default styles in one browser may be different in the next browser, and modern normalize resets those styles so that they appear identical across all browsers. Here, it's telling us how to install it. However, personally, I prefer simply opening modern normalize.css, clicking on raw, selecting everything, and copying it. Then, back in VS Code, on the styles folder, I'll create a file called modern-normalize.css and paste the code here. Now, we need to import that code in main.js. When we import CSS files, we need to be mindful of the order in which we import them. I want modern normalize to have the least possible cascading priority, so I'll import it above style.css. Whenever I build a website, before I start building it, I like to set myself up for success by adding some base styles to reset the HTML, defining variables for sizes and colors, and creating utility classes for reusable stuff like buttons, containers, and spacing. So let's start by resetting some of the HTML elements. In my empty style.css, normally, the first thing I would do is add a box sizing of border box to everything like this. However, modern normalize already does this for us, so we don't have to. I'll select everything with the star selector and give everything the margin of 0 and the line height of 1.5. A line height of 1.5 is very common, but there is an issue with this. This line height looks perfect on regular sized elements, and to demonstrate this, I'll replace Hello World with a lorem ipsum paragraph. I'll also give the heading a font size of 1 rem. You can see for yourself, a line height of 1.5 looks amazing. If I comment it out, our paragraph is all squished up together. This is ugly, and with it back on, it looks amazing. However, if I set the font size on our heading to 2 rem and save, we see that the line height is just too large relative to the font size. There's a neat trick to fix this. Instead of giving our line height a fixed value, we can use the calculation notation for a little bit of mathematics to make the line height correctly relative to the font size. Inside the calc notation, I'll say 1m plus 0.5 rem. Now, when I save, we see we've got the correct line height regardless of how large our font size is, and the way this works is 1m is taking the font size of the element and adding 8 pixels to it, because 0.5 rem equals 8 pixels. We could even replace 0.5 rem with 8 pixels, and you can see there's no difference. However, we shouldn't be using pixels, which is why I use 0.5 rem. I'll remove the styles on the heading, and I'll also replace the lorem ipsum back to being Hello World. Back in my CSS, I'll select the HTML element and give it the scroll behavior of smooth. This makes scrolling to different sections a transition. Next, I want to apply a font family to the body. The font family used in the demo is called General Sans, and we can find it on fontshare.com. On their website, I can search for General Sans and click it. I'll select regular, medium, semi-bold, and bold. But to be honest, we might not need all of them. Then I can click on Style Selected on the top right corner, click on Use, Proceed, and copy the link tag. I can paste this link in the head of my HTML. Then back on the website, I'll copy the font family CSS, go in my style.css, select the body, and paste in the font family. Under the body, I'll select the image tag, the picture element, the video element, the canvas element, and the SVG element. I'll give those the display of block because by default, they're all inline elements, and when you think about it, you never use them inline. When's the last time you've added an image tag in the middle of a paragraph? Probably never, so these elements should all be block level elements. I'll give them a max width of 100% and a user select of none because there's really no reason to be able to select any of these. Back on my index.html, I'll add a button just to see how it looks like on Chrome by default. Pretty ugly. I'll select the button element and give it a display of inline block, a padding of 0, a border of none, a background of none, and a cursor of pointer. Our button doesn't even look like a button anymore, but at least later, when I'll create a styled button, I won't have to wrestle with the default styles that the browser ships with. We should probably start thinking about colors and sizes. Looking at the demo of what we're building, which by the way has a link to it in the description of this video, we can see that we have a dark color as a background, a light color for the section titles, 2 more colors right here on the hero section. They look like lighter versions of the background color. We also have a red or rose color on our buttons and links, and an indigo color on strong elements. So in total, I'm seeing 7 colors. Picking colors yourself is actually very difficult. I'll show you how I pick these colors. I'm heading over to tailwindcss.com, click on Docs, and scroll down slightly to find the color page. Tailwind CSS and other CSS libraries like Bootstrap, Bulma, etc. aren't just CSS libraries, they're also an opinionated design pattern. You can use the color palettes they methodically created for your own projects. Anyways, I'll leave this page open for later and head back to my CSS file. I'm going to put my colors inside CSS variables because colors are properties we constantly have to use, and referencing them through variables makes our lives a million times easier. At the top, before everything else, I can select the root like this. And now I can start giving names to our 7 different colors. Dash dash color dash dark dash dash color dash light dash dash color dash slate 400 dash dash color dash slate 600 dash dash color dash slate 800 dash dash color dash rose dash dash color dash indigo. Now back on the Tailwind CSS website, I'll click to copy the slate 100 and paste it in the color light variable. Slate 400 for the slate 400 variable, slate 600 for the slate 600 variable, slate 800 for the slate 800 variable. For the rose variable, I'll scroll all the way down and select rose 600, copy and paste it on our rose variable. Then I'll find the indigo 600, copy and paste it on our indigo variable. Finally, the dark variable is all that's left. This one is slightly more complicated because the darkest shade of slate on the Tailwind CSS website isn't dark enough. I'll still click to copy it, then I'll do a Google search for color converter and select the first one, which is from W3 Schools. I'll paste the color here and click on use this color in our color picker. We see the shade is at 11%. I'll copy the hex code for the 5% one, and that'll be the color for our dark variable. We can try out our new colors by adding a background color of var dash dash color dash dark and a color of var dash dash color dash light to the body element. We see this worked, however, we're not seeing our button anymore. I can add a color of inherit to the button and now it'll inherit the color of its parent. Under the button, I'll select the anchor element and give it our rose color. And underneath that, I'll select the strong element and give it our indigo color. To see if they worked, I'll add a paragraph filled with some filler text and wrap the first few words with the strong element and the last few words with the anchor element. Save, and we see our strong element has the indigo color and the anchor element has the rose color. Inside the styles folder, I'm going to create a new file called utils.css. I also need to make sure that I import it in our main.js. I'll import it underneath all the other imports. Actually, I want the utils import to be the last CSS import. All future CSS imports are going to be above the utils import, and this is because utility classes need to have the highest priority, otherwise they won't work. The purpose of the utils.css file is for us to add utility classes for CSS rules or components we use often. For example, when we look at our demo, we see we're using the same styles for each button. It would be silly for us to repeat the styles that make up our button each time we define a button. So instead, what we can do is define a button utility class like this and start giving it styles. I'll give the button a display of inline block and a font weight of 600. When I save, we see nothing happened. This is because to use utility classes, we need to head over to our HTML and on the button element, assign it the class of button. We can now see changes reflected to our button. I'll give it a text decoration of none, a letter spacing of -0.05 This will pull the letters closer to each other, a background color of our rose variable, a color of light, a padding of 0.5 for the top and bottom, and 1 for the left and right, and a border radius of 6 pixels. Our button is missing a box shadow. Before I add it, I'll copy the hex value of our rose variable, head over to the color converter from before, paste in the hex value, and copy the RGB value. Back in my style.css, I'll add a comment underneath the color variables that says rose and the RGB value that I just copied. I'll do the same thing with the indigo color. Copy the hex value, paste it in the color converter, grab the RGB value, and add a comment saying indigo and the RGB value. These will be useful for later. Anyways, I'll copy the rose RGB value and go back to my utils.css. I'm going to add a box shadow to the button utility class. I'll give it a value of 0, 10 pixels, 20 pixels, and the rose RGB, but I'll add an A at the end of RGB, and I'll also add a fourth value of 0.5 to the RGBA. This value represents the opacity. I'll add a comma, 0, 6 pixels, 6 pixels, and the same RGBA value. I'll add another comma, 0, 0, 100 pixels, minus 10 pixels, and the variable of dash dash, color dash, rose. It's looking pretty good. However, on our demo, the button moves up and the box shadow changes on hover. So underneath the button class, I'll select it with the hover state and give it the transform of translate Y minus 3 pixels. I'll also copy over the box shadow above and change its values. 0, 14 pixels, 28 pixels, and I'll change the opacity from 0.5 to 0.25. 0, 10 pixels, 10 pixels, and again, I'll change the opacity, but this time to 0.22 pixels. 0, 0, 120 pixels, and minus 10 pixels. If you're wondering how I got these values, I just randomly played around with the box shadow. There's not really any logic to this. I just messed around with it until it looked good to me. Hovering over our button, we see this works, but it's missing a transition. On our button class, I'll add a transition of transform, 0.3 seconds, and a box shadow of 0.3 seconds. This next utility class is probably the most important one. If we head over to the demo website and open the developer tools, we see that on each section, we've got a class called container. If I click on a section with the container class, on the right side of the developer tools where all the CSS is, I can scroll down slightly to find all of the styles that are applied to the container class. I'm going to add a border of 1 pixel, solid red. Now, when we look at our demo, we see each section on our demo website has a red border around it. The container utility class is important for a couple of different reasons. First, it makes sure that all the sections are properly aligned. And secondly, look at what happens when I resize the browser. The moment the viewport touches the border, the container responsively shrinks. It only shrinks when the border is touched. This is superior than the common way of making things responsive. The common way of making a website responsive is to have arbitrary values for media queries that you spontaneously add when things aren't responsive anymore. So, for example, on an old website that I made a while back, here's a list of all the media queries that I had to use. The reason there's so many media queries is instead of using a container that changes in size when the border is touched, I was using a container with a percentage value. This is the website. The first thing you'll notice is there's nothing aligned. None of the sections align with one another. And the second thing you'll notice is when I resize, because I'm using percentages for my containers, the container is constantly resizing, and as a consequence, I need to use an absurd amount of media queries to make sure everything is always responsive. If you contrast this with our demo website, everything is aligned, and above all else, containers aren't constantly resizing. They only resize when the viewport touches it, and as a result, we only have 6 media queries. Throughout our entire website, we're only using 6 media queries, no more, no less. Whereas with the other website, I was using a grand total of 16, and I would have needed to use much more if the website was any larger in scale. I didn't even mention the fact that using percentages for containers ruins the layout on 4K monitors. Back on the old website, if I set percentages here to 50% and make the website as wide as possible, this is what it would look like on super large monitors. Everything's elongated and as far away from each other as possible. Not good. Whereas in our demo website, if I do the same thing, we see everything is still exactly as you would expect it to be. So I think I've made a solid case for my container utility class. Let's finally create it. Under the button utility class, I'll define a container class and temporarily comment it out. Under the container utility class, I'll start adding those 6 media queries I was talking about. The first is going to be for extra small screens, so I'll add a comment saying extra small, and I'll define a media query with a min width of 475 pixels. I'll copy this and paste it 5 more times. This one is going to be small, this one medium, large, extra large, and 2XL. The small screen I'll set to 640 pixels. The medium screen I'll set to 768 pixels. Large screen to 1024 pixels. Extra large to 1280 pixels. And the 2XL to 1536 pixels. I'll comment them all out for now. The way this works is anything I add outside of the media queries is going to apply default styles and also styles for screens smaller than our first breakpoint of 475 pixels. This architecture is called mobile first. Styles outside of the media queries are for default styles and for screens smaller than 475 pixels. This is what it means to build mobile first. If we wanted to build desktop first, we would replace min width on each of the media queries to max width, and the styles outside of the media queries would apply styles for screens larger than our last media query of 1536 pixels. I don't have any issues personally with desktop first. However, the standard is definitely to build mobile first. So I will uncomment the container class and give it a width of 100%. I know I said not to use percentages in our container, but on screens smaller than 475 pixels, we don't really have a choice. It's too small. Then I'll add a margin left of auto, a margin right of auto, a padding left of 0.5 rem, and a padding right of 0.5 rem. There's also a shorthand where we can just say margin 0 auto. But the issue with this is that because utility classes have the highest cascading priority, a 0 on the top and bottom won't allow us to add margins on the top and bottom on any element that has the container utility class. This is why we need to define each margin and padding specifically without using a shorthand. When I save, we see nothing happened. This is because we need to give the container utility class to a parent element. I'll add an article element, give it the container class, and move all of our content inside it. I'll also add a border to the container class so we can better see it. Next, I'll uncomment the first media query. I'll select the container class and give it a max width with the same breakpoint as the media query, so 475 pixels. With a breakpoint set to a min width and the container set to a max width, both with the same pixel value, this is what makes the container shrink when the viewport touches it. You can see when I resize the viewport past 475 pixels, the container stops using percentages. Then, if I size down, it only goes back to using percentages once the container is touched. I'll uncomment all the other breakpoints, copy the container inside the first breakpoint, and paste it inside all of the empty media queries. Then, I'll replace the value on each max width so that it has the same pixel value as its media query breakpoint. And now we see when I resize the viewport, our container is automatically being responsive just like in our demo. I'll remove the border on the container, and also because these 6 breakpoints are going to be used throughout our sections and components, I want to have a quick reference to them so that I can copy and paste them on other CSS files when I need to. I'll copy all of the media queries and paste them at the top of the file. I'll also remove the styles in each query, and then I'll comment them all out. This is just so that I can quickly copy and paste these in other files when I need to. There's only one last utility class that I want to add, and it's a small one. On our demo website, we can see that each section is separated by a gap. This gap is a utility class. Inside our utils.css file, underneath the container class, I'll add a utility class called section. I want this section to have a margin top of 5 rem. And then on the large media query, I want the margin top to be 10 rem. So to see what this looks like over on the HTML, I'll copy the entire article and paste it directly underneath. We see both sections are touching. We can use the section utility class to separate them. I'll add a section utility class to the second article element, and now we see this looks much more natural. And we can also see that on large screens, the spacing is slightly increased. There's also one last thing that I want to do before I start building out the sections. I want to add some sizes as variables. So inside our style.css, underneath the color variables, I'll add a comment saying sizes. I'll call it dash dash size and a dash for now. I'll copy and paste it 14 more times. The first one is extra small. Second, extra small. Third, small. Base, large, extra large. 2XL, 3XL, 4XL, 5XL, 6XL, 7XL, 8XL, 9XL, and 10XL. I'll set extra small to 0.5 rem, extra small to 0.75 rem, small to 0.875 rem, base to 1 rem, large 1.125 rem, extra large 1.25 rem, 2XL 1.5 rem, 3XL 1.875 rem, 4XL 2.25 rem, 5XL 3 rem, 6XL 3.75 rem, 7XL 4.5 rem, 8XL 6 rem, 9XL 8 rem, and 10XL to 10 rem. I don't know whether we're going to need all of them, but at least we have them if we need them. And in case you were wondering, I got these values from Tailwind CSS. In my index.html, I'm going to delete everything inside the body except for the script. Our website has 7 sections. At the top, we have a header. At the very bottom, we have a footer. In between those, we have our main content. And our main content is comprised of 5 sections. We're going to be building one section at a time, so I'm going to comment out everything except for the header. So right now, all we have is the header. I'll give it a class of header, and I'll also give it the container utility class. Looking at the demo website, we see the header is a navigation with 5 items and a separator. Back in our code, inside the header element, I'm going to add a nav sectioning element, and inside it, I'll add an unordered list. I'm going to give the unordered list 3 list elements for now. On our demo, the first 3 items are links that send us to different sections of the page. So inside the first 3 list elements, I'll give them an anchor element. The first anchor will have an href of hashtag about. The second anchor will have an href of hashtag featured. And the third anchor will have an href of hashtag contact. Also, the first anchor will display about. The second will display work. And the third will display contact. To start adding styles to the header, I'm going to create a new folder inside my styles folder called components. Inside the components folder, I'll create a CSS file called header.css. I'm going to separate the styles for each section inside the components folder. And the reason I'm doing this is I think this is a much cleaner approach than just lumping everything together inside one CSS file. Plus, when you start using JavaScript frameworks like React, you follow a similar architecture where each component is decoupled. Now, all I need to do before I can use the header.css file is import it inside my main.js. I'll import it after the style.css, but before the utils.css. And now, inside my header.css, before I even start styling anything, I want to go grab the media queries from the utils.css file and paste them inside my header.css. Everything I put outside the media queries will be for screens smaller than the first media query of 475 pixels. So above the media queries, I'll select the header by its class name. I'll give it a display of flex, a justify content of flex end to push the navigation to the right side, and align items of center, a padding top of 2 rem, and a padding bottom of 2 rem. You could also use the shorthand padding like this if you want. This works fine. However, because of the container utility class, which has some padding on the left and right sides, I prefer not using the shorthand padding on the header class. Our menu is currently vertical. Back in my index.html, I'll add a class to the unordered list of header __menu. This naming convention is called bem, we prepend the name of the section and then add 2 underscores and the name of the class. So in this case, our unordered list is a menu, and this menu is inside the header. So with the BEM naming convention, we call this class header underscore underscore menu. Now I can select the header menu and start styling it. I don't want the menu to be vertical, so I'll give it a display of flex. I'll also give it an align items of center. I can remove the dots in our unordered list with a list style of none. I'll temporarily add a border of 1 pixel solid red, and we see on the left side of the menu there's some space. This is default padding from the unordered list, so I'll add a padding of 0 to remove it. To space each list item out, I'll also add a gap of 2em, and I don't need the border anymore, so I'll just remove it. Now I need to style the links, so back in the index.html, I'll give them a class of header underscore underscore link. I'll select them in the CSS and give them a font size of variable size extra small. This is one of the variables that we defined in the style.css. Our links are looking super small, but remember, we're building mobile first, so later I'll make them bigger for larger viewports. I can remove the underscores with a text decoration of none. I'll make them look slightly bolder with a font weight of 600. I'll change their colors to a slate 600. And I'll give them a tighter letter spacing with a letter spacing property of minus 0.05em. I want the links to change colors when I hover over them, so right underneath, I'll select the links by their class name and add the hover pseudo class. On hover, I want the color to be our rose variable color. It's working, but it's just missing a transition of color 0.3 seconds to make it perfect. Our menu is missing the separator line, the sun button for dark and light mode, and the resume button. I'll do one at a time. In the HTML, I'll add an empty list element with the class of header underscore underscore line. I'll select it in the CSS and give it a border of 1 pixel solid and our slate 800 variable. And I'll give it a padding top of 1.5em. Now for the sun button, I'm going to do a Google search for hero icon and go to their website. I'll search for sun, select the solid option, and on the sun icon, I'll click on copy SVG. In the index.html, under the empty list element, I'll add another list element with a button inside it. Inside the button, I'll paste the SVG code and save. The icon is invisible. This is because we need to style it. I'll remove the class attribute from the SVG, and then on the button, I'll add a class of header underscore underscore sun. Back in the header.css, I'll select the header underscore underscore sun and give it the color of slate 600. The width of our base variable and a height of our base variable. It's now visible, but it doesn't seem to be properly aligned. To fix this, I just need to add a display of block. It's now properly aligned, and the reason it wasn't was because the button had a default display of inline block. We're just missing the resume button, so in the index.html, I'll add the last list element and give it an anchor element. I'll leave the href with a hashtag, but if you're going to be using this website, you can add a link to your resume here. I'll add a class to the anchor element of header underscore underscore resume and the button utility class. When I save, we see the resume button is too big relative to the other items. In the header.css, I'll select the button by its class name and give it a font size of extra small. Our header is looking good. However, if I resize our demo, we see that the header displays a hamburger button on small viewports. It only starts displaying the menu on our medium breakpoint of 768 pixels. Because our menu should only display on viewports above 768 pixels, I'll uncomment the medium media query and move everything except the header class inside it. Then I'll reselect the header underscore underscore menu outside of the media queries and give it a display of none. And now we see our menu is only being displayed when we reach a viewport of 768 pixels. I'm going to go back to the hero icon website, search for bars, select the solid option, and copy the SVG of bars tree. Under the unordered list, I'll add a button with the class of header underscore underscore bars. I'll paste in the SVG and I'll remove the class attribute from the SVG. I'll select the button by its class name in the CSS and give it a color of our light variable, a width of 2xl, a height of 2xl, and a display of block, because I'll also select the button in our medium media query and give it a display of none. Now, when we're on small screens, we see the bars icon, and when we're on larger screens, we see our menu. The only thing left for us to do in our header is making the font size on the menu slightly larger on large screens. In our medium media query, I'll select everything from the header underscore underscore link to the header underscore underscore resume and paste them in the large media query. Inside the header link, we can remove everything except for the font size. I'll also remove the hover pseudo class. I'll remove the header line. In the header sun, I'll remove the display of block and the color property. I want the header link and the header resume to have a font size of small instead of extra small. And I want the sun icon to have a width and a height of extra large. And that's it for the header. We'll add the mobile menu later, where we click on the 3 bars icon and it opens a mobile menu, but the header itself is finished and fully responsive. The next section is the hero section. Looking at our demo, we see this section is pretty simple. We've got an image, 2 headings, a paragraph, a button, and everything is centered. In the HTML, I'll uncomment both the main element and the first section element. The other section elements can stay commented out. I'll give the section the class of hero and container. Inside it, I'll add an image, an h2, an h1, a paragraph, and an anchor element. For the image, I need to go to my desktop. I have a folder called images with all the images that I need for my portfolio. I'm going to open the profile folder and copy the hero image. Then, in my root directory, there's a folder called public. I'll open and paste my profile image here. By the way, if you don't know where your source files are, you can right-click on VS Code and click on Reveal in File Explorer. Now, with my image inside my public folder, I can add its route inside the source attribute. The route is ./public/hero.jpg. There's my face for all to judge. However, because we're using Vite, assets that are inside the public directory can be referenced simply by a slash. So inside my source attribute, I can remove the route and just say /hero.jpg. And when we save, we see this works just fine. Inside the alt attribute, I can give a short description of my image. I'll just say profile picture. On my demo, I'll copy the text on the first heading and paste it in my h2 element. I'll copy the text from the second heading and paste it in my h1 element. I'll copy the text from the paragraph and paste it inside the paragraph element. And the button should say reach out, so inside the content of my anchor element, I'll say reach out. I'll also give each element a class, the image a class of hero underscore underscore image, the h2 a class of hero underscore underscore subtitle, the h1 a class of hero underscore underscore title, the paragraph a class of hero underscore underscore description, and the button a class of hero underscore underscore button, and our button utility class. To start styling this section, I'll create a hero.css file inside the components folder. I also need to import it inside main.js after the header import, but before the utils import. I'll select the entire section by its class name. I want this entire section to be centered. So what I can do is set a text align of center, and now everything is centered. I'll select the image by its class name, and I'll give it a border radius of 50%, a width of 6 rem, and a height of 6 rem. We see our image is the correct size, but isn't centered. This is because in my style.css, I chose to reset the image tag to have a display of block. This is a good reset. However, it's bad if we want to use the text align property. There's a couple of ways we can fix this. We could give a display of inline to our hero image, and we see our image is now centered. I could also give it a display of inline block, and this works the same. Another solution is instead of changing the display on our image, we can use Flexbox in our hero section. I'll give the hero section a display of flex, a flex direction of column, a justify content of center, and an align items of center. We see our image is now centered, and although this required many more properties than simply redefining the display on our image, I'll still use this solution because by using Flexbox, I get access to the gap property, which is quite useful because I want each element to be spaced out from each other. So I'll give the hero the gap property and I'll set it to 1 rem. I'll also add a margin top of 2 rem to the hero section just so that we're not so close to the header. I'll select the h2 heading by its class name. It has a class name of hero underscore underscore subtitle. I'll give it a color of slate 800 and a font size of base. Now I'll select the h1 heading by its class name. It has a class name of hero underscore underscore title. I'll give it a color of slate 400, a text transform of uppercase, a font size of 4XL, a letter spacing of negative 0.05 em, and I'll reduce the line height to 0.9. Actually, I'll also give the subtitle a line height of 0.9. Next, I'll select the paragraph by its class name. I'll give it a max width of 60 ch, a font size of small, and a color of slate 600. The last element left is the button. I'll select it by its class name. Give it a text transform of capitalize and a font size of small. Before I start adding media queries and making the website responsive, you'll notice that when I resize the page to like 640 pixels, our h1 heading goes from displaying on 2 lines to displaying on 1 line. I never want this to happen. I want the heading to always display on 2 lines. So what I'll do is over on the HTML, in the contents of our h1 heading, I'll add a BR tag in between front end and web developer. And now when I resize, my heading stays on 2 lines, which is what I want. Also, in our demo, some of the words in our paragraph has strong emphasis. Let's add them. I'll wrap front end / full stack Jamstack with the strong element. And I'll also wrap UI / UX with the strong element. Now, I'll go grab the media queries we commented out earlier on our utils.css and paste them at the bottom of the hero.css file. Let's go look at how our demo handles the responsiveness of our hero section. We see that everything grows when we hit our first breakpoint. However, on the second and third breakpoint, nothing changes. On the 4th breakpoint, everything grows, and then on the 5th breakpoint, everything grows again, and on the 6th breakpoint, nothing happens. So back in our code, I'll copy all of the styles from the hero to the button, literally everything. I'll uncomment out the first media query and paste our code. Inside our hero class, I'll delete everything except for the gap property, and I'll increase the gap from 1 rem to 1.5 rem. Inside the image class, I'll delete the border radius and increase the width and height from 6 rem to 6.5 rem. Inside the subtitle, I'll delete the color and line height and increase the font size from base to large. Inside the title, I'll delete everything except for the font size, which I'll increase to 5XL. Inside the description, I'll delete everything except for the font size, which I'll increase to base. And last but not least, on our button, I'll delete the text transform property and I'll increase the font size from small to base. Let's see the result. We see on our first breakpoint, everything is growing as expected. I'll copy the code from our first media query. I'll uncomment the large media query and I'll paste our code inside it. We're not increasing the gap on this breakpoint, so I'll remove the hero class. I'll increase the width and height of our image to 8 rem. I'll increase the font size on our subtitle to 2XL. On our title, I'll increase the font size to 7XL. And on both the description and button, I'll increase the font size to large. I'll copy the code from this breakpoint. I'll uncomment the next breakpoint and paste in our code. I'll select the hero and give it a gap of 2 rem. I'll increase the width and height of the image to 10 rem. I'll increase the font size of our subtitle to 4XL, the font size on our title to 9XL, and the font size on our description and button to XL. Let's see how our hero section now looks on our different breakpoints. We see our section is fully responsive from mobile viewports all the way up to desktop viewports. Actually, I'll close the developer tools and compare our hero section to the one on our demo. We see they're identical. The only difference is our demo has a custom scroll bar, but we'll cover that later. We're done with the hero section. Let's take a look at the About section on our demo. On mobile screens, the section has a column layout, and when we increase the viewport, we eventually switch to a row layout with the content on the left and the image on the right. Let's see how we can do this. Over on the index.html, I'll uncomment one section element and leave the others commented. I'll give it a class of About, our container utility class, and our section utility class. This is the first time we get to use the section utility class, so in case you've forgotten, all it does is adds a margin top to separate the sections from one another. I'm going to be adding a display of flex to the About section. If you're not comfortable with Flexbox, I have an 8-minute video on everything you need to know to start using it. But because the parent element is going to have a display of flex, I need to wrap the elements that make up the About section into containers. So basically, looking at our demo on a large viewport, the content on the left is going to be wrapped inside a container, and the image on the right is also going to be wrapped inside a container. Back in our index.html, inside this section, I'm going to add 2 div elements. These 2 div elements are my 2 containers. Then back on my demo, we see we have a heading, 3 paragraphs, a horizontal line, another heading, and an unordered list. So back in my index.html, inside the first container, I'm going to add an h2 heading, 3 paragraphs, an hr tag, an h3 heading, and an unordered list with 6 list elements. Inside the h2 heading goes About. For the paragraph, I'll just go and copy the text from the demo. Inside the h3 heading goes Technologies. Inside my first list element, I have JavaScript, ES6+, CSS, HTML, React.js, Next.js, and Tailwind CSS. Also, on my first paragraph, I should have a strong element wrapped around front-end full-stack Jamstack. And on the third paragraph, I should also have an anchor element wrapped around slaying the dragon. We're done with the first container. Inside the second container, I just need to add an image tag. However, I need to go copy my profile picture from my desktop inside the same folder as earlier. I'll copy the about.jpg and paste it inside the public directory. Back in my index.html, for the source attribute, I can simply say /about.jpg. And remember, the reason I can just say /about.jpg instead of the full route is because we are using Vite, and Vite has static asset handling as a feature where the public directory is the root of all our assets. And if that doesn't make any sense, I guess in simpler terms, with Vite, the public folder is a special folder, and inside the source attribute of our image, we can just say /about.jpg instead of ./public/about.jpg, because again, with Vite, the public folder is a special folder. Anyways, inside the alt attribute, I'll just say profile picture. To start styling the section, inside the components folder, I'll create a new file called about.css. Before I can use it, I need to open my main.js and import it. I'll import it under the hero.css, but above the utils.css. I want some space in between the content. There's a couple of ways we can do this, but I think the simplest way is to use the gap property. To use it, we also need to use flexbox. So on my first container, I'll give it a class of about underscore underscore content. I'll select it in the about.css and give it a display of flex, a flex direction of column, and a gap of 1 rem. And now we see we've got some spacing in between each element. Next, I'll give a class to my heading of about underscore underscore title. I'll select it in the CSS and give it a font size of 2XL. We see nothing changed, and this is because a size of 2XL or 1.5 rem is the default font size on H2 elements. I won't remove the font size, even though we technically don't need it. Having it there adds readability. I'll also give it a color of light. Again, we see nothing happened, and this is because on our body, we set the default color to light. So again, I could remove it, but I'll keep it there for the same reason that I'm choosing to keep the font size property. I'll give our 3 paragraphs the same class of about underscore underscore description. I'll select it in the CSS and give it a max width of 60 ch, a font size of small, and a color of slate 600. Next, I'll give a class to the HR tag of about underscore underscore HR. I'll select it in the CSS, and all I need to do here is add a border color of slate 800. Under the HR is the H3 element. I'll give it a class of about underscore underscore subtitle. I'll select it in the CSS and give it a font size of small and a color of slate 400. The last element inside this container is the unordered list. I'll give it a class. For a lack of a better name, I'll just call it about underscore underscore UL. I want some space in between each list item. So back in my CSS, I'll select the unordered list by its class name and give it a display of flex, a flex direction of column, and a gap of 1 Looking at our demo, we see we're using a thumbs up instead of a default disk. To change this is actually easier than you would think. We can use the list style type property, and for the value, we can pass it the CSS code to the thumbs up emoji. To get that code, we can head over to Google and search for Unicode thumbs up. I'll copy the Unicode and paste it as a value to the list style type property. We see this didn't work, and this is for 2 reasons. First, we need to add single quotes around the value, and then we need to delete U plus and replace it with a backslash. Unicodes work in CSS, but you just have to fix the syntax to turn the code into valid CSS. Next, I want to fix the padding on our unordered list. By default, the UL element has a padding left of 2.5 We see nothing changed. However, if I set it to 0, we see the text is aligned with the container, but our thumbs up is outside of the container. To align it with the container, we just need to set the padding left to 1 and now we see everything is perfectly aligned. Back in the HTML, I'll give each list item the class of about underscore underscore list. I'll select them in the CSS and give them the font size of small and the color of slate 600. We see this looks good. The only thing I'd like to add is some space in between the thumbs up and the text. You would think adding some space in between the two would be a simple task, but because of how the unordered list works, it's actually a little tricky. For example, if I add a margin left to the unordered list of 0.5 we see this pushed the entire thing to the right. This is no good. If I add the margin left to the list elements, the same thing happens. So again, this is no good. To add some space in between the thumbs up and the text, we need to reselect the list elements by their class name and follow that up with the before pseudo class. The way the before pseudo class works is we give it the content property, and as a value, we add single quotes, and inside the single quotes, we can add any text we want. So for example, I'm going to add hello world, and we see hello world was added before the text. If I replace before with the after pseudo class, now our hello world is after the text. However, I'll go back to using the before pseudo class because I want to add spacing before the text, not after. To add the space, I can just use the margin left of 0.5 em from before, and we see we finally have our spacing. I'll remove the hello world by leaving the single quotes empty. We need to have the content property defined despite not actually using it. If I comment it out, we see we lose our spacing. Also, we're using a margin left here, but we could also use a margin right, and this works the same because the margin is being added before the text regardless of whether we're using the left or right margin. We can actually see this better if I add a border of 1 pixel solid red. We see our border is next to our thumbs up, and if I were to use a margin left, our border is now next to the text. So regardless of which margin we use, we get our spacing. Before we start making this section responsive, there's one last thing we need to fix. On our demo, the list items have a horizontal layout. To do this, on our index.html, above the unordered list, I'll add a div with the class of about __ul dash container, and I'll also move the unordered list inside it. I'll create another unordered list right under our first unordered list and give it the same class as the first unordered list. I'll select the 3 last items from the first unordered list and move them inside the new unordered list. In the CSS, I'll select the about __ul dash container, and all I want to add in here is a display of flex, nothing else. We've got our horizontal layout. However, the 2 unordered lists are right next to each other. I want to add some space between them, but before I do, inside the about __ul, I'll just quickly add a border of 1 pixel solid red, just so we can better see what's going on. To add some space in between the 2 UL elements, I could add a justified content of space between to the container, but I think they get too far apart. I could instead add a gap of like 5 em or whatever, and this works, but for this specific case, I think there's a better solution. I'll remove the gap property, and inside my about __ul, I'll add a flex property and set it to 1. Remember, if you don't fully understand Flexbox, I have a video on it, but in a nutshell, what's going on here is because both the unordered list share the same class, I can give them a flex of 1, and this will fractionally distribute an equal amount of available space to both of them. I'll remove the red border, we don't need it anymore. I'll go in my utils.css, grab the media queries, and paste them at the bottom of the about.css file. The first thing I want to do is make the about section have a horizontal layout on large screens. To do this, I'll uncomment the large media query, I'll select the entire about section by its class name, and I'll give it a display of flex, a justified content of space between, and an align items of center. We see when I resize all the way up to our large breakpoint, the layout changes to a horizontal one. This is good, but I'm noticing that there's no space between the content and the image on both the vertical and horizontal layout. To fix this, at the very top of the file, outside of the media queries, I'll select the about section by its class name and give it a display of flex, a flex direction of column, and a gap of 1 rem. Then, back on our large media query, I'll remove the display of flex because it's already defined by default outside of the media queries, but now I need to explicitly define a flex direction of row. When I resize the viewport, we see everything is working. We're on a vertical layout on small screens, and then when we reach our large breakpoint, we shift to a horizontal layout. We also have our space in between the content and the image. Looking at our demo, when I resize from small screens up to our first breakpoint, we see that the layout doesn't really change. However, everything increases slightly in size. So back in my CSS file, I'll copy everything that's outside of the media queries. I'll uncomment the first media query, and I'll paste the code here. On the about class, we don't need to change the display and the flex direction, so I'll remove them. The gap, however, I'll increase to 1.5 rem. On our about __ content, we again also don't need to change the display and the flex direction, so I'll remove them. And I also want to increase the gap to 1.5 rem. On the title, we don't need to change the color, so I'll remove it. I'll increase the font size from 2XL to 3XL. On the description, I'll remove the max width and the color because we're not changing them, and I'll increase the font size from small to base. We don't need to make any modifications to the HR element, so I'll remove it entirely from our breakpoint. On our subtitle, I'll remove the color property and increase the font size from small to base. I don't want to change the container on our unordered list, so I'll remove this entirely. On our unordered list, there's a lot of styles in here, but there's no change we need to make, so I'll remove it. On our list items, I'll remove the color because we're not changing it, and I'll increase the font size from small to base. The lists with the before pseudo class can be removed because there's no changes to be made. When I resize the browser up to our 475 pixel breakpoint, we see our styles are working as expected. The gap is slightly increased and the font size of everything is also slightly increased. Now let's take a look at our demo to see what happens on the next breakpoint. When I resize up to 640 pixels, the first thing we notice is that the content moves closer to the edge of the viewport. This is happening because of our container utility class. When I compare both the demo and the development server, we see that the only difference is the size of the image. Looking at my demo, we can notice that I tried to keep the size of the image from the previous breakpoint instead of allowing the image to grow the entire width of the container, like what's currently happening in our dev server. By the way, I think the dev server and the demo are getting confusingly similar, so on my demo, I'll just toggle the light mode so we can better differentiate between the dev server and the demo. The dev server is the dark website and the demo is the light colored website. Anyways, all I need to do on this breakpoint is keep the size of the image instead of allowing it to grow. So in my index.html, I'll add a class to the image of about__image. Then I'll uncomment the small media query and select the image by its class name. I want to define a width, but to get the width from the previous breakpoint, what I can do is on my dev server, use the select option from the developer tools to select the image while making sure we're on the previous breakpoint, so basically under 640 pixels. When I hover over the image, we see the width is 459 pixels. This is the width that I want to have on my image, but I want this value to be in the rem unit. To convert a pixel value into rems, I can open my calculator and say 459 divided by 16, because 1 rem is 16. I can copy the result, paste it as a value to our width property, and also add the rem unit at the end. We see this worked, but our image isn't centered. In my index.html, I'll add a class to the div wrapping the image of about__image-wrapper. I'll select it in my small media query above the image, and I'll give it a margin of 0 auto. And now we see this centered our image. We've been using Flexbox a lot to center things around, but sometimes in some use cases, it's a bit overkill. For example, instead of using this margin of 0 auto, I could comment it out and instead use display flex, justify content center, and align item center. We see our image is centered, but there's no real reason to use Flexbox in here. Flexbox would be useful had we more than one element inside our wrapper, but with only an image, there's no reason to use it, and a margin of 0 auto works just fine. And real quick, if you're wondering how this margin is centering the image, I'll show you. I'll comment it out for 1 second, and I'll add a border of 1 pixel solid red. Looking at our dev server, we can see that the wrapper covers the entire container. I'll open the developer tools and select the image. We see on the developer tools that we're setting a fixed width to the image. When I check it off, the image covers the entire available space. And when I check it back on, because we're setting a fixed width, we're leaving some space available. So to center the image, instead of instantly running to Flexbox, we can instead just fill up the available space equally on both the left and the right side with some margins. When I set a margin of 0 auto, we're saying don't add margins to the top and bottom, but automatically add some margins to the left and right sides. Auto will fill the available space equally with margins on the left and right sides, which in turn centers our image. I'll remove the border, we don't need it. The next breakpoint is the medium one. However, looking at our demo, we see nothing really happens until we reach the large breakpoint. On the large breakpoint, we see the layout changes from a vertical one to a horizontal one. We also see that the font sizes of our content is slightly larger. It's hard to see because it's a small increase, but the content on this breakpoint is slightly larger. So in our CSS, we see we already have the large media query uncommented, and we also already have the horizontal layout set up from earlier. All we need to do is increase the size of our content. From our extra small media query, I'll copy everything from the about underscore underscore title down to the about underscore underscore list. I'm not grabbing the about and the about content because I don't want to increase the gap property. I'll paste the code inside the large media query under the about class. I just want to increase the font sizes one variable up. So the font size on our about underscore underscore title can be 4XL instead of 3XL. The font size on the other classes are all set to base. In our style.css, we see that the size variable, one level larger than base, is large. So each font size with the size of base, I'll change to large. For the next breakpoint, I just want to slightly increase the size of everything. So from the previous media query, I'll copy everything from the about underscore underscore title down to the about underscore underscore list. I'll uncomment the extra large media query and I'll paste everything in here. I'll increase the title from 4XL to 5XL and I'll increase all of the other font sizes with the size of large to extra large. In our extra small media query, I'll copy the about underscore underscore content and paste it in our extra large media query. I want to increase the gap from 1.5 rem to 2 rem. You'll also notice that if I open our hero.css file, we see our hero class has a gap property of 1 rem by default. Then on the extra small media query, we increase the gap to 1.5 rem. And then on the extra large media query, we increase it again to 2 rem. We're doing the same thing with the content of the about section. The about underscore underscore content has a default of 1 rem, then 1.5 rem on the extra small media query, and then 2 rem on the extra large media query. Consistency is key to beautiful layouts. The last thing I want to do is increase the size of the image. On our demo, when we inspect and select the image, we see that on our extra large breakpoint, the image has a width of 492 pixels. I'll open my calculator to convert it to rems. 492 pixels divided by 16 equals 30.75. So back in our CSS, inside our extra large media query, I'll select the image by its class name of about underscore underscore image and give it a width of 30.75 rem. And we're pretty much done with the about section. We see we've got the 2XL media query left, but there's nothing we need to do on this breakpoint, so we can just ignore it. The next section is the featured section. It has a subtitle, a title, a paragraph, a list, and images. I'm going to do this section in 3 parts: the subtitle, title, and paragraph in part 1, the text stack, project type, and timeline in part 2, and the images in part 3. Over on the HTML, I'll uncomment the next section and give it a class of featured and our container and section utility classes. Inside this section, I'll add an h3 with the class of featured underscore underscore subtitle and the content of featured project, an h2 with the class of featured underscore underscore title and the content of slaying the dragon, a paragraph with the class of featured underscore underscore description. And for the content, I'll just go back to my demo and copy the text I have there. It's just filler text, and I'll paste it inside my paragraph element. On our demo, we see we've got a clickable icon. Clicking it does nothing because this is just a demo. But if you're going to be using this website for your portfolio, you can make this link send users to your featured project. I'm going to go to the hero icon website, search for link, and copy the SVG. In my HTML, under the title, I'll add an anchor element with the class of featured underscore underscore link. Inside the anchor element, I'll paste the SVG, and inside the SVG, there's a class attribute. We don't need it, so I'll remove it. To start styling this, inside my components folder, I'll create a new file called featured.css. Now I need to import it inside my main.js. I'll open the utils.css file, copy all of the commented out media queries, and paste them inside our empty featured.css file. The first element I'm going to style is the title because it's the easiest and also because it'll have the same styles with the same breakpoints as the title in our About section. Actually, because both titles are identical, we could consider making them utility classes, but because this is just a portfolio website, I won't bother. However, what I'll do is open the about.css file, copy the styles from the about title, and paste them in our featured.css file. I'll go back to the about.css file, look for the same title in the extra small media query, and copy it. I'll go back to the featured.css, uncomment the extra small media query, and paste in the title. The title is located in two more breakpoints, the large and the extra large breakpoints. However, I won't bother fetching them from the about.css file. Instead, what I'll do is uncomment the large media query and uncomment the extra large media query. I'll copy the title from the extra small media query and paste it in both the large and extra large media queries. I need to change each class from about__title to featured__ title. Then I just need to make sure that they're all increasing in size by one level. 2XL, 3XL, 4XL, and 5XL. Next, I'll select the featured__ subtitle and give it a font size of small, a color of indigo, a text transform of capitalize, and a font weight of 400. I'll select it in the extra small media query and increase its font size from small to base. I'll copy it, then paste it in the large media query and increase the font size from base to large. I'll paste it again in the extra large media query and increase the font size to extra large. Let's fix our icon. I want the icon to have the same size as our title, so I'll select it and give it a width and height of 2XL. We see nothing happened. This is because anchor elements have a display of inline by default. We could add a display of inline block to our link, and as you can see, this fixes it. Actually, a display of block would also fix it, but because we want the link to be to the right of the title in a horizontal layout, what we can do is remove the display property from our link, and instead, over on the HTML, above the title, add a div with a class of featured__ wrapper, and wrap both the title and the anchor element inside it. Then, back in the CSS, I'll select the featured__ wrapper and give it a display of flex. We see this worked. I'll also add an align items of center to center the icon, and I'll also add a gap property of 1 rem to add a little bit of spacing. Also, inside the media queries, wherever I'm increasing the size of the title, I want to also increase the size of the link so that both the title and the link are always the same size. So I'll copy the link from outside of the media queries and paste it inside the extra small media query under the title. I'll change the width and the height from 2XL to 3XL, just like the title. I'll do the same on the large media query and the same on the extra large media query. Also, looking at my title, I just noticed that I forgot to make it all uppercase. All I have to do is add the text transform property of uppercase to my title. The next element we need to style is the paragraph. I'll select it by its class name and give it a max width of 60 ch, a color of slate 600, a font size of small, and a margin of 1 rem for the top and bottom and 0 for the left and right. I'll copy the description and paste it in the extra small media query. I don't need to change the max width and the color, so I'll remove them. I'll increase the font size from small to base, and I'll increase the margin top and bottom from 1 rem to 1.5 rem. I'll copy it again and paste it in both the large and extra large media query. On our large media query, I don't want to change the margin, so I'll just remove it. However, I will increase the font size from base to large. Then, on our extra large media query, I'll increase the font size to extra large, and I'll increase the top and bottom margins from 1.5 rem to 2 rem. We're done with the first part. Looking at our demo, we see the second part is composed of 3 containers, a text stack, a project type, and a timeline. So in our HTML, under the paragraph, I'll add 3 div elements. Inside the first one, I'll add an h3 element with the class of featured __ label and displaying text tag. Under it, I'll add an unordered list with 7 list items. The unordered list with a class of featured __ tech dash stack, and each list items with a class of featured __ info. The first list item is Tailwind CSS. The second is React.js. Third is React Hook Form. Next.js, Axios, Supabase, and Stripe. Inside the next div element goes an h3 element with the class of featured __ label and a paragraph element with the class of featured __ info. The heading displays project type, and the paragraph displays full stack, Jamstack. Inside the last div element is again an h3 element with the class of featured __ label and a paragraph with the class of featured __ info. The heading displays timeline, and the paragraph displays December 2022 present. In our CSS, I'll select our headings by their class name of featured __ label and give them a font size of base, a text transform of capitalize, and a margin bottom of 0.25 em. Next, I'll select the unordered list by its class name of featured __ tech dash stack and give it a padding of 0 and a list style of none. Lastly, I'll select all of the list and paragraph elements by their class name of featured __ info and give them a font size of small, a color of slate 600, and a text transform of capitalize. I'm going to copy featured label, featured text stack, and featured info, and I'll paste them inside the extra small media query. I'll delete featured text stack. It's our unordered list and there's nothing we need to change. On our featured label, I'll remove the text transform and the margin bottom, and I'll increase the size from base to large. On our featured info, I'll remove the color and the text transform, and I'll increase the font size from small to base. I'm going to copy both these classes and paste them inside the large media query. I'll increase the font size on the label from large to extra large, and on the info, I'll increase the font size from base to large. I'll copy them again and paste them inside the extra large media query. Label can be increased to 2XL, and info can be increased to XL. Looking at our dev server, we see that the sizes are looking good. However, we just need to make them have a horizontal layout on larger screens, just like in our demo. To achieve this, we need to head over to our HTML and wrap all 3 containers inside a parent div. So under our paragraph, I'll add a div with the class of featured __ info dash container and move all 3 div containers inside it. Then, back in the CSS, I'll select the parent container by its class name of featured __ info dash container and give it a display of flex, a flex wrap of wrap, and a gap of 1 rem. Then I want to select all the div elements inside the container. To do this, I'll reselect the featured __ info dash container, add a space, and say div. This line is selecting all the divs inside the container. Inside it, I'll add a border of 1 pixel solid red to better see what's happening. I'll add a flex of 1 so that they all have the same width, and I'll also give each div a min width of 250 pixels. Because of our min width, on small screens, we have our vertical layout, and then eventually, when there's enough space, the divs will wrap into a horizontal layout. We see this happening on our dev server. Eventually, there's enough room to fit all 3 on the same horizontal line. I'll remove the border. We don't need it anymore. The third and last part of this section is displaying images of our featured project. On our demo, on small screens, we see the images are being displayed in a vertical layout. As I increase the viewport to larger screens, eventually the images start appearing both in a horizontal layout and a vertical layout. we've got images sitting next to each other and we've got images underneath each other. So in other words, both horizontal and vertical. Also, we notice that there's a background color on top of each image. I'll close the developer tools and hover over the images. We see that this background color has a reduced opacity when we hover over it. So back in our HTML, under the div that wraps the text stack, project type, and timeline, I'll add 8 image tags. Now I need to go on my desktop on the images folder, open the featured folder, and copy all of the images in here. I'm going to paste them inside my public folder. These images are screenshots of a website that I made for myself. If you're wondering how I took the screenshots or what's the best way of taking screenshots of a website, I'll show you. I'll head over to any website. The website doesn't matter, so I guess I'll head over to heroicons.com. Then, to take a screenshot, you just need to open the developer tools by pressing Ctrl-Shift-I on the Chrome browser, and then press Ctrl-Shift-P. A run command bar will open. I'll type screenshot, and you can select any one of these options. I'll select the last option, capture screenshot, save, and voila. Back in our HTML, now that I added all the images of my featured project inside my public folder, I can start selecting them in the source attribute. The route to the first image is /slayingthedragon.png. And again, I said this before, but I'll say it again. Because we used Vite to bootstrap our project, we get to use some of Vite's amazing features, one of them being able to reference the public folder simply by a slash. This is why I can say /slayingthedragon.png instead of ./public/slayingthedragon.png. The second image is /courses.png. Third image is /pricing.png. Fourth is /features.png. /fac.png. /blog.png. /signin.png. and /app.png. Then, for the alt attribute, I'll select them all and say Slaying the Dragon because they're all images of the Slaying the Dragon website. Then I'll individually add on which section they are. So the first one is Hero. Second is Courses. Third is Pricing. Features. Facts. Blog. Sign in. And Dashboard. We see we've got our images. The reason they're blending so well with our portfolio website is because I used the same background color on that project. And even if they weren't blending so well and had a totally different color scheme than our portfolio website, I would still need to find a solution to make the screenshots blend with the colors of our website for design purposes. The way I decided to tackle this problem is with the background colors we see on our demo that sits on top of the images. To add this effect to our images, we need to wrap each image inside its very own div element. Doing this one by one would take forever. A quick way to do this is with the mouse, click at the end of the first image tag, then press and hold the Alt key on your keyboard. With the Alt key pressed, we can start adding clicks at the end of each image tag. With the ends all clicked, I'll press Enter on my keyboard, type div. Typing div triggers the emit extension to pop up. We see emit abbreviation, and now if I press tab or enter, we get our div element. I will press enter to open up all of the div elements. Then with the arrow keys on my keyboard, I'll go up by 2 so that I'm on each image tag. I'll press the Alt key again on my keyboard and hold it. With the Alt key held down, I can press on the bottom arrow key to move the images down inside the div elements. I'll save to let VS Code in prettier format the white space, and we see each image tag is now inside a div element. We're not done. I want to add a class to each of the div elements, and because we've still got our clicks on the image tags, I can move up by 1 to be on the div elements and add the class attribute of featured__image-wrapper. Then, to add a background color on top of the images, I need to select the wrapper in the CSS and also provide it with the after pseudo class. Inside it, the first thing I need to do is add the content property because this is pretty much required when we're using either of the before or after pseudo classes. I'll just leave the content with empty single quotes. Then I'll add the background color property. I'll head over to my style.css file, copy the indigo RGB, and paste it inside our background color. I'll add an A at the end of RGB so that it's RGBA, and then I'll add a forward value of 0.4. This value represents the alpha, which is basically just transparency. When I save, we see nothing happened. I need to add a width of 100% and a height of 100% because I want the background color to be 100% of the width of the image and 100% of the height of the image. When I save, we see still nothing happened. I'll add a position of absolute because I need my background color to be removed from the document so that it can sit on top of the image, and I'll add a top of 0 and a left of 0. I'll add a z index of 1 so that we're always layered on top of anything with a lower z index. When I save, we see nothing happened to our images. However, if I look at the top of my page, we see we've got our background color filling out the entire width and height of the body. The reason this is happening is because currently the position of absolute is being positioned relative to the entire document. To make the position of absolute relative to the images instead of the entire document, we need to define a position property set to anything other than static on the closest parent. Because we're using the after pseudo class, the closest parent is the wrapper itself, so I'll reselect it above the after pseudo class and give it the position property of relative. We see our background color is now relative to the wrapper instead of being relative to the entire document. Now, I know the position property is confusing. Using it almost feels like we're hacking our way to achieving what we want, but I have an entire video on my channel dedicated to how the position property works, so if this was confusing to you in any way, then I highly suggest you watch that video. Looking at our demo, we see that when we hover over the images, the background color changes. To do this, I'll reselect the featured __ image dash wrapper with the after pseudo class, and in between both the class name and the after pseudo class, I'll add the hover pseudo class like this. I'll copy the background color, paste it in here, and reduce the last value from 0.4 to 0.1. I also need a transition so that the animation doesn't happen instantaneously. So under the Z index, I'll add a transition property of background color and 0.3 seconds. On our dev server, we see when we hover over our images, the opacity on the background color is reduced. The only thing left for us to do in this section is to make the images responsive. We see in our demo, as we increase the size of the viewport, images allow themselves to eventually sit next to each other in a horizontal layout. To achieve horizontal layouts, typically I would pick Flexbox as my preferred tool because horizontal layouts are one-dimensional, so are vertical layouts. Vertical layouts are also one-dimensional. However, the layout on our images aren't one-dimensional. They're two-dimensional because although we eventually get two images next to each other, we still have other images underneath. In other words, we've got both a horizontal layout and a vertical layout simultaneously, and the best tool for two-dimensional layouts is Grid. So I'm going to be using Grid here instead of Flexbox, and to use Grid, we first need to wrap all of our images inside a parent container. Above the images, I'll create a div with the class of featured __ image dash container and open it. Then I'll select all of the images and move them inside our image container. I'll select the container in the CSS, and the first thing I want to do is give it a margin top of 1 rem. This is because we were missing spacing in between the timeline and the images. Next, I'll give it a display of grid and a grid gap of 1 rem. Now, what I want to do is when there's enough space available, allow images to sit next to each other. Currently, all the images are displayed on top of each other because the images keep growing to fit the container. We can fix this with one line of CSS. I'll add a grid template columns property. As a value, I'll use the repeat notation, which takes 2 arguments. The first is the amount of times we want to repeat a value, and the second is the value we want repeated. So usually, for the first argument, you would pass it a number, but in this case, I'm going to use the autofit keyword, and what the autofit keyword is saying is instead of repeating a fixed number of times, do it automatically for as many times as it can fit. For the second argument, I'll use the min-max notation, which also takes 2 arguments. The first one is the minimum size that we're going to allow our columns to get. And by the way, because our columns are all comprised of images, this is more like defining what the minimum size we're going to allow our images to get. And the second value is the maximum size we're going to allow our image to get. I'll set the first value to 300 pixels and I'll set the second value to 1 FR. If you're following along, make sure you add a comma in between each value. But basically, what this line of CSS is doing is defining columns that will automatically fit content when there's enough room available. And perhaps the key to understanding this line of CSS is the min-max function. The autofit keyword is pretty self-explanatory. However, the way min-max is allowing for content to wrap when there's enough space is looking at our dev server, we see on super small screens, the images won't go below 300 pixels because that's what we set the minimum value to be. And because we set the maximum value to be 1 FR, this means our images will grow with the container, allowing us to get the sizes much larger than our minimum size. Where the magic happens is eventually the container grows when hitting one of our breakpoints. When I say container, I'm referring to our container utility class. I'll head over to my utils.css file and add a border of 1 pixel solid red to the container just to better demonstrate. So here, at around 320 pixels, we're outside of our breakpoints, then eventually we reach our extra small breakpoint and the container increases in size, allowing more space. However, on this breakpoint, it didn't allow enough space for 2 images to occupy a width of 300 pixels each. But when I increase the size of the viewport up to our small breakpoint, this is where the magic happens because the autofit keyword is telling the 1FR to stop growing the image because there's finally enough room for 2 images to have 300 pixels next to each other. This is why this line of CSS is so magical. The autofit keyword pretty much tells the 1FR on our min-max function to stop and allow 2 images of minimum 300 pixels to live next to each other. Now, this is pretty cool if you ask me, but if I keep increasing the size of the viewport on our dev server, we see we get too many images on a horizontal layout. On our demo, we never get more than 2 images next to each other. So to fix this, I'll copy the featured __ image dash container, uncomment the small media query, and paste it inside. I'll remove everything except for the grid template columns, and I'll just increase the minimum value from 300 pixels to 500 pixels. This simple change should fix our problem, and we should ever only have 2 images next to each other. We see this worked just fine. There's just one more thing I want to adjust. In the extra small media query, I'll select the featured __ image dash container and give it a margin top of 1.5 rem and a grid gap of 1.5 rem. Then I'll copy it and paste it inside the extra large media query, and here I'll increase them both from 1.5 rem to 2 rem. I'll remove the border on our container utility class, and there you have it. We're done with this section. We see on our dev server, everything is looking good and responsive. The next section is the projects section. This section serves to display projects we've completed in the past. We'll build this in 2 parts. The first part is the title and description, and the second part is the projects. So in our HTML, I'll uncomment another section, and I'll give it the class of work, container, and section. Inside the section element, I'll add an h2 heading with the class of work __ title, and inside it, I'll say projects. Under the h2 element, I'll add a paragraph with the class of work __ description, and then I'll go copy the filler text from the demo and paste it inside the paragraph. Inside our components folder, I'll create a new file called work.css. Then I need to import it inside our main.js under the featured.css, but above the utils.css. I'll open utils.css and copy all of the commented out media queries and paste them inside work.css. I'll select our title by its class name and give it a font size of 2XL, a color of light, and a text align of center, because on our demo, we see the title is displayed in the center. Next, I'll select the paragraph by its class name of work __ description, and I'll give it a max width of 60 ch, a font size of small, a color of slate 600, a text align of center, and a margin of 1 rem for the top and bottom, and 0 for the left and right. Both our title and paragraph look fine on the dev server that we have open here, but if I open my dev server with the large viewport, we see our paragraph is on the left side of our screen. The reason this is happening is because I defined a max width on our paragraph. To fix this, all I have to do is have the margin property have the value of auto instead of 0 on the left and right sides, and now we see our paragraph is positioned in the middle of the screen. I'll copy both the work underscore underscore title and work underscore underscore description. I'll uncomment the extra small media query and paste them both inside it. For the title, I'll remove all of its properties except for the font size. I'll increase the title's font size from 2XL to 3XL. Inside the description, I'll remove all of the properties except for the font size and the margin. I'll increase the description's font size from small to base, and I'll increase the margin, top and bottom, from 1 rem to 1.5 rem. I'll copy both of them. I'll uncomment both the large and extra large media queries, and I'll paste my code inside both media queries. Inside the large media query, I'll increase the font size of the title from 3XL to 4XL, and I'll increase the font size of the description from base to large. I'll remove the margin because I don't need to change it on this breakpoint. Inside the extra large media query, I'll increase the font size of the title to 5XL, and I'll increase the font size of the description to extra large. I'll increase the margins top and bottom from 1.5 rem to 2 rem. We're now done with the first part of this section. Looking at our dev server, we see that our title and paragraph are centered and are both responsive. Now it's time for the hard part, creating this zigzag layout we see on our demo. If I resize my demo down to very small screens, we see that the layout here isn't all that complex. It's just a normal vertical layout. However, the complexity increases as I increase the size of the viewport until eventually the layout changes from a regular vertical layout to this grid layout. Let's start with the small screen layout. On my demo, on very small viewports, we see we've got a heading, an image, 2 paragraphs, and a button. Then, this order of elements is repeated 5 more times. So in our HTML, under the paragraph, I'll add a comment saying project 1. Under the comment, I'll add an H3 heading, an image tag, 2 paragraph elements, and an anchor element with the href of hashtag and the class of button. Inside the heading, I need to give it the name of the project. On our demo, the first project we're showing off is called Wax Motif, so inside our heading, I'll say Wax Motif. For the image, I need to add the images that go in this section to my public folder. I need to go grab these images from my desktop, inside the images folder, and inside the projects folder. I'll copy all of them and paste them inside my public folder. These screenshots are all squares. When I was taking the screenshots, I purposely resized the browser so that the height and the width were the same. If you're going to be using this portfolio for yourself, what you can do is go on one of your projects, resize the browser so that the width and height are both something like 900 pixels, and then use the DevTools on Chrome to take the screenshot like I showed you earlier. Anyways, with the screenshots inside my public folder, I can now reference them inside the source attribute of my image tag. The route to the wax motif image is /waxmoney.png. For the alt attribute, I'll just say wax motif website. For the first paragraph, I'll head over to my demo, copy the filler text, and paste it inside the first paragraph. Then, I'll do the same for the second paragraph, copy it from the demo, and paste it inside the second paragraph. Inside the anchor element, I'll just say website. We see we've got our heading, our image, our paragraphs, and our button. However, none of them are centered. Looking at our demo, notice how everything in this section is centered. Because everything is centered, in the CSS, I'll select the entire section by its class name of work, and I'll give it a text align of center. With the entire section having a text align of center, I don't need to be defining a text align of center anywhere else, so I'll remove the text align property from our title and description. Then, in the HTML, I'll give the h3 element a class of work underscore underscore project dash title. In the CSS, I'll select work underscore underscore project dash title and give it a font size of base and a margin bottom of 1 rem. The image should have a background color above it, exactly like on the images from our featured section. So what I'm going to do is open our featured.css file and copy the styles that apply this background color effect. I'll copy the wrapper, the after pseudo class, and the hover state. I'll paste my code inside work.css and rename each of them so that they're called work underscore underscore image dash wrapper instead of featured underscore underscore image dash wrapper. Then in the HTML, I need to wrap the image tag inside a div with the class of work underscore underscore image dash wrapper. When I save, we see we've got our background color effect. The only thing I want to change is when we hover over it. Currently, the opacity goes from 0.4 to 0.1. However, on this section, I want the opacity to go from 0.4 to 0.3. So inside my hover state, I'll change 0.1 to 0.3. Next is the two paragraphs. On our demo, the two paragraphs look identical. This is because we're on light mode. I'll scroll up, open the menu, and click on the sun icon to switch back to dark mode. I'll scroll back down, and as you can see, the first paragraph is darker than the other. On light mode, they look the same, but on dark mode, they have slightly different colors. So because they're different, I'll give them different class names. I'll give the first paragraph a class of work underscore underscore project dash description 1. And I'll give the second paragraph a class of work underscore underscore project dash description 2. Then in the CSS, I'll select work underscore underscore project dash description 1 and give it a font size of small, a color of slate 600, and a margin of 1 rem for the top and bottom and 0 for the left and right. Under description 1, I'll select work underscore underscore project dash description 2 and give it a font size of small, a color of slate 400, and a margin bottom of 1 rem. This looks a lot better, but the button is too large. Back in the HTML, I'll add a class to the anchor element of work underscore underscore project dash button. Then in the CSS, I'll select work underscore underscore project dash button and give it a font size of small. Our wax motif project is looking good. In the HTML, I'll copy from the comment saying project 1 all the way down to the anchor element, and I'll paste the code right underneath the anchor element. I'll change the comment so that it says project 2 instead of project 1. Jace Force is the name of the second project, so inside the H3 heading, instead of wax motif, I'll say Jace Force. Then, inside the source attribute of our image, instead of waxmoney.png, I'll say jaceforce.png, and I'll also change the alt attribute to Jace Force website. For the paragraphs, I'll go to the demo website and copy the darker paragraph. I'll paste this inside the first paragraph, and I'll do the same for the second paragraph. We see both projects are touching. There's no space between them. To add some space in between each project, what I'm going to do is on both the project 1 and project 2, I'll add a div underneath our image wrapper with the class of work underscore underscore project. On project 1, I'll open the div, select the two paragraphs and the anchor element, and move them up inside the div. I'll do the same on project 2. I'll open the div, select the two paragraphs and the anchor element, and move them up inside our new div element. Then, in the CSS, above description 1, I'll select the div by its class name of work underscore underscore project, and I'll simply add a margin bottom of 5 rem. Now our projects are separated by a margin bottom of 5 rem. However, I don't want the last project to have a margin bottom. I want the spacing to be in between the projects, so on the last project, there shouldn't be a margin bottom. Project 2, for now, is our last project. We're going to be adding more soon, but currently, it's as if it was our last project, and we see it has some bottom margin. What we can do is where we're selecting the work underscore underscore project, I can append the not pseudo class, and inside the parentheses, I can add the last child pseudo class. What this is doing is it's saying add a margin bottom to all of the elements with the class of work underscore underscore project, except the last one. So now we see, because project 2 is currently the last project, the div with the class of work underscore underscore project isn't getting a margin bottom. I can start adding the other projects. In the HTML, I'll copy the entire project 2 code and paste it underneath. I'll change the comment from project 2 to project 3, and I'll change the heading from JSForce to Artrin, because Artrin is the name of my third project. The source on the image tag needs to be changed to artrin.png, and the alt attribute can say Artrin instead of JSForce. For the paragraphs, I'll go to my demo, copy the first text, and paste it inside the first paragraph. I'll go back to my demo, copy the second text, and paste it inside the second paragraph. There's 3 more projects to add. I'll copy our first 3 projects and paste them underneath. I'll fix the comments so that they show the correct number. On our project 4, I'll change the heading from Wax Motif to Platform Pro, the route on the source attribute to platformpro.png, and the alt attribute from Wax Motif to Platform Pro. And I won't bother changing the filler text inside our paragraphs anymore. Project 5 is called Wally's Vegan. I'll change the heading to Wally's Vegan, the route on the source attribute to wallysvegan.png, and the alt attribute to Wally's Vegan. Project 6 is my old portfolio. I'll change the heading to Old Portfolio, the route on the source attribute to portfolio.png, and the alt attribute to portfolio. It's time to make our section responsive. In the CSS, I'll copy the work underscore underscore project dash title. This is our H3 heading with the project titles like Wax Motif, JSForce, Artrin, and the others. I'll paste it inside the extra small media query. I'll increase the font size from base to large, and I'll increase the margin bottom from 1 rem to 1.5 rem. Next, I'll copy both descriptions and paste them inside the extra small media query. I can remove the color property on both these classes because I don't need to change them. On both classes, I'll increase the font size from small to base, and I'll increase the margin bottom from 1 rem to 1.5 rem. By the way, because both of these classes share the same styles, we could, if we wanted, have them be defined together and separated by a comma. This works fine, and if you want to do it like this, you can, but personally, and this is very subjective, I actually prefer having them separated. Despite the fact that we're repeating ourselves, I like having my styles separated. To me, it just looks more readable, but like I said, this is very subjective. The last element I need to add to this breakpoint is the work underscore underscore project dash button. I'll copy and paste it inside our breakpoint. I'll increase the font size from small to base. We're done with this breakpoint. The next breakpoint is actually where we create our grid layout. To create a grid, we first need to wrap all of our projects inside a container. Above project 1, I'll create a div with the class of work underscore underscore container and open it. I'll select all of our projects and move them up inside our container. Then, in the CSS, I can uncomment the small media query, select the work underscore underscore container, and give it a display of grid. We see nothing happened, and this is because we need to define some columns. Looking at our demo, we see this grid layout has 2 columns. So inside our CSS, under the display of grid, I'll add a grid template columns of 1fr and 1fr. Now, on our dev server, we see we've got our 2 columns. However, the H3 heading that displays the name of our project is occupying the entire column. We actually don't want to display this heading when we reach this breakpoint. So in the CSS, inside the small media query, under our container, I'll select it by its class name of work underscore underscore project dash title and give it a display of none. With the heading gone, we see the columns are correctly occupied by images and content. However, the order is wrong and the font size on the content is too large compared to on our demo. So let's fix this. On the extra small breakpoint, I'll copy description 1, description 2, and the button. Then I'll paste them inside the small breakpoint. I want all of them to have a font size of extra small instead of base. On the margins, instead of 1.5 rem, I'll set them to 1 m. I'm using the m unit here instead of rems because I want the margin to be relative to the font size. We see this already looks better. Outside of the media queries, we're setting a margin bottom on the not selector. We don't need this margin bottom when the layout changes into a grid, so I'll copy it, paste it inside the small media query, and I'll set the margin bottom to 0. Earlier, we removed the heading that displayed the name of the project. However, on our demo, we see above the first paragraph, there's a heading. This is another heading that gets displayed when reaching this breakpoint. So in our HTML, I want to add a new h3 element above the first paragraph on each project. To do this, I'll click next to the work underscore underscore project div on project 1. Then on project 2, I'll press and hold the Alt key on my keyboard and left click next to the work underscore underscore project div. This added a click. We've got 2 clicks right now. Both are next to the work underscore underscore project div in project 1 and 2. I'll keep adding clicks next to all of the work underscore underscore project divs across all our projects. Then, with all the clicks added, I'll press enter on my keyboard and add an h3 element with the class of work underscore underscore project dash subtitle. We just added an h3 element above all of the first paragraphs and on all of the projects. On project 1, I want the heading to display wax motif. On project 2, I want the heading to display J's force. On project 3, I want the heading to display Archon. On project 4, Platform Pro. Project 5, Wally's Vegan. And on project 6, Old Portfolio. Back in our CSS, I need to select our new heading outside of the media queries first and give it a display of none because I don't want this heading to appear until we reach our small breakpoint. I'll copy it and inside our small breakpoint, I'll paste it and change the display from none to block, and I'll also give it a font size of base. Now, looking at our dev server, we've got all of the elements we want and with the correct size. I am noticing though that our content isn't currently positioned in the middle. See, there's a bunch of space below the button. To fix this, all I have to do is where I'm defining a display of grid, I can simply add a place items of center. Place items, if you don't know, is a shorthand for the justify items and align items properties. So instead of defining both justify items and align items of center, it's quicker to just use the place items of center. Now we see on our dev server, the content is positioned in the center of its container. This is good, but another thing I'm noticing is that the content itself is way too close to the edges of the column. For design purposes, we need to add some padding on the left and right sides. The div that wraps all the content has a class of work underscore underscore project. So back in our CSS on our small media query, I'll select work underscore underscore project and give it a padding of 0 for the top and bottom and 1 rem for the left and right sides. Now looking at our dev server, we see our padding created some space so that the text isn't so close to the edges. This is looking very good. We just need to make some changes to our grid so that we can get the zigzag layout we see on our demo. The easiest way to achieve this is with the grid template areas property. In our CSS, inside our small media query and under the grid template columns property, I'll add the grid template areas property. As a value, I'll give it 6 sets of single quotes. Inside the first set of single quotes, I'll say image1 and content1. Inside the second set, content2 and image2. Inside the third, image3 and content3. Fourth, content4 and image4. Fifth, image5 and content5. And sixth, content6 and image6. We've got 6 sets of single quotes because we've got 6 rows of projects. And we've got 2 values inside each set of single quotes because in each row, we've got 2 columns. These values aren't defined yet, but you can already see the zigzag layout from one image to the other and from one content to the other. To define these values, I need to head over to the HTML. Inside project 1, I'll add a class to the div that wraps our image tag. I'll call the new class work__image1. Then on the div with the class of work__project, I'll add a class of work__content1. I need to do this for all the projects. So inside project 2, on the div that wraps the image, I'll add a class of work__image2. Then on the div with the class of work__project, I'll add a class of work__content2. Project 3, on the image wrapper, I'll add work__image3. And on the div with the class of work__project, I'll add work__content3. Project 4, same thing, work__image4 and work__content4. Project 5, work__image5 and work__content5. And project 6, work__image6 and work__content6. Then in the CSS, I'll select the image of our first project by its class name of work__image1 and give it a grid area of image1. I'll copy this and paste it 5 more times. On the second one, I'll add a click at the end of work__image1, and at the end of image1, I'll replace 1 with 2, replace this one with 3, this one with 4, this one with 5, and this one with 6. Underneath them, I'll select the content of our first project by its class name of work__content1 and give it a grid area of content1. I'll copy it and paste it 5 more times. On the second one, I'll add a click at the end of work__content1 and at the end of content1. I'll replace 1 with 2, replace this one with 3, this one with 4, this one with 5, and this one with 6. This was kind of tedious, but looking at our dev server, we see it paid off. We've got our layout. On the next media query, I just want to increase the font size of the heading, the 2 paragraphs, and the button. I'll uncomment the medium media query. Then inside the small media query, I'll copy the subtitle, description 1 and 2, and the button. Back in the medium media query, I can paste our code. The only property I want to change on this breakpoint is the font size. So I'll remove the display from the subtitle, I'll remove the margin from the first description, and I'll remove the margin bottom from the second description. For the font sizes, I just want to increase their sizes by 1 variable. So in the subtitle, instead of base, I want large, and on the others, instead of extra small, I just want small. I want to do the same thing on the next breakpoint. I'll copy all of the styles inside the medium media query and paste them inside the large media query under the styles we defined earlier. Again, I just want to increase the font size on our content by 1 variable. So for the subtitle, I'll increase it from large to extra large, and on the others, from small to base. For the extra large breakpoint, I also want to increase the font size of our content. So inside the previous breakpoint, I'll copy our 4 classes and paste them inside the extra large media query. I'll increase the subtitle from extra large to 2XL, and I'll increase the others from base to large. If I compare both the dev server and the demo on the same breakpoint of extra large, we see that on our demo, the section appears to be thinner. This is because I thought when I reached this wide of a breakpoint, the images were getting too big. My solution was to reduce the width of the container. So back in our CSS, inside the extra large media query, I'll select the container by its class name of work__container. Work__container, by the way, is the div with the display of grid, and that wraps all of our projects. I'll give it a width of 80%. Looking at our dev server, we see this made our container thinner, like in our demo. However, our container isn't centered anymore. To fix this, all I have to do is also give our work__container a margin of 0 for the top and bottom, and auto for the left and right. With the left and right margins set to auto, our container is now centered. I'll uncomment the last media query, and inside it, I'll select work__container and give it a width of 70%. This is because when we reach our very last breakpoint, I once more want to reduce the width. Looking at our dev server, we see this looks perfect. We're finally done with this section. This was probably the most difficult section, so if you've made it this far, good job. The next two sections are incredibly easy. Starting with the contact section, we see on our demo, all this is a title, a paragraph, and a button. In our HTML, I'll uncomment the last section element and give it a class of contact, container, and section. Inside the section, I'll add an h2 element with the class of contact__title, and I want this heading to display get and contact. Then I'll add a paragraph with the class of contact__description. And for the content, I'll head over to my demo, copy the text, and paste it inside the paragraph element. Lastly, I'll add an anchor element with the class of contact__button and our button utility class. On our demo, when I click on this button, it opens a new tab where I can send an email. For me, it's Gmail because that's what I have set up as a default. If you go on the demo yourself and click on this button, you might get a different result depending on your device and browser settings. You might be thinking, why not set up a form so that people can send us emails through a form? The issue with forms is that they don't allow for back and forth emails. Forms are great for freelancing, but if it's for a hiring position, the person trying to reach out to you doesn't want to use your form. They want your email, and they want to be able to reach out to you through their own means, which is why I chose to have a simple button here. Forms are better suited for other use cases like a payment form or a survey form, for example, but that's just my opinion. You could always extend this portfolio, add a form yourself, and use a service like FormsPre to make your forms send emails to you. Anyways, back in our HTML, to make our button be an email button, all I have to do is inside the href attribute, say mail to, colon, and our email. So for me, slayingthedragon.io@gmail.com. In our dev server, clicking on the button, we see it works. However, I want this to open in a new tab. So after the href attribute, I'll add a target attribute of _blank. This will open our mail to in a separate tab. In the past, when we would use target_blank, we would need to also define a rel attribute of no opener, no referrer, but this isn't necessary anymore. All major browsers now do this automatically. All that no opener and no referrer did was prevent a security issue from being exploited when using a target of blank. I can remove it now because as of 2021, browsers do this automatically for us. Inside our components folder, I'll create a new file called contact.css. I need to import contact.css inside our main.js. I'll import it after work.css, but before utils.css. I'll go to my utils.css file, copy the commented out media queries, and paste them inside our contact.css file. I want the entire section to be in the middle, so above all of the media queries, I'll select the entire section by its class, and give it a display of flex, the flex direction of column, the justify content of center, the align items of center, a text align of center, and a gap of 1 rem. Next, I'll select the title by its class name and give it a font size of 2XL, a color of light, and a text transform of capitalize. I'll select the paragraph by its class name and give it a font size of small, a color of slate 600, and a max width of 60 ch. Lastly, I'll select the button by its class name and give it a font size of small. I'll copy literally everything, uncomment the extra small media query, and paste everything inside it. On the contact, the only thing I want to change is the gap from 1 rem to 1.5 rem. Everything else can be removed. On the title, I'll increase the font size from 2XL to 3XL. Everything else can be removed. On the paragraph, I'll increase the font size from small to base. Everything else can be removed. And finally, on the button, I'll increase the font size from small to base. I'll copy all 4 classes. We can skip the small and medium breakpoints, uncomment both the large and extra large media queries, and paste our 4 classes inside both of them. Inside our large media query, I don't want to change the gap on the contact, so I'll remove this class from this breakpoint. I'll increase the title from 3XL to 4XL. I'll increase both the paragraph and the button's font size from base to large. Then, inside the extra large media query, I'll increase the gap from 1.5 rem to 2 rem, the font size on the title to 5XL, the font size on the paragraph to XL, and the font size on the button to XL. We're done with this section. Looking at our dev server, we see our contact section is centered, responsive, and the button opens a new tab for sending an email. Also, people can right-click on the button and just copy the email address if they want. The last section is the footer. Looking at our demo, we see all it is some text in the middle. That's it. In our HTML, I'll uncomment the footer element and give it a class of footer, container, and section. Inside the footer, I'll add an h3 element with the class of footer __ title. And for the content, I just want to display my full name wrapped in tilde symbols. If you're going to be using this portfolio, just remember to change the name for yours. Inside the components folder, I'll create a new file called footer.css. Then inside main.js, I'll import it after contact.css, but before utils.css. Inside footer.css, we're not even going to need media queries. All I need to style is the title, so I'll select it by its class name and give it a font size of extra small, a font weight of 400, a color of slate 600, a text align of center, a text transform of uppercase, a letter spacing of 0.2 em, and a user select of none, because there's no reason to be able to select it. That's literally it. We're done with the footer. Currently, when we click the links on our header, nothing happens. You can see the route changing on the address bar. This is because in our HTML, inside the header, where we're defining anchor elements, we added inside the href attribute a hashtag and the name of the section we want to go to. To make the About button scroll down to the About section, all we need to do is find our About section element and give it the ID attribute of About. Now on our demo, when we click the About button on our header, the page scrolls down to the About section. Back in our HTML, I'll do the same with the 2 other sections. I'll find the featured section and give it the ID attribute of featured. Then I'll find the contact section and give it the ID attribute of contact. Now clicking on any of these buttons will send us to its section. Another thing we need to do is create a navigation menu for mobile screens. Clicking on our bars icon does absolutely nothing, but on our demo, when we click it, it opens a mobile version of our menu. To create the mobile navigation menu, I'm going to go in my HTML, and under the header section, I'll add 2 comments. The first one will say mobile navigation, and the second one will say end of mobile navigation. In between these 2 comments, I'll add the code for the menu. Because this isn't a section, I'll use a div element and give it a class of mobile-nav. Inside our div, I'll add a nav element because this is going to be a navigation. Inside our nav element, I'll add an unordered list with the class of mobile-nav__menu. And inside it, 6 list elements. Inside the first 3 list elements, I'll add an anchor element to each with the class of mobile-nav__link. I'll give the first anchor element the href of hashtag about and the text of about. I'll give the second anchor element the href of hashtag featured and the text of work. And for the third anchor element, I'll give it the href of hashtag contact and the text of contact. On our demo, we see under about, work, and contact, we've got a horizontal line. So on our 4th list element, I don't need to add anything inside it, but I'll give it a class of mobile-nav__link-line. For the 5th list element, I want the sun button. I'll look for it in the header, copy the button and SVG, and paste them inside our list element. I'll just change the class on our button from header__sun to mobile-nav__sun. Inside our last list element, I'll add an anchor element with the class of mobile-nav__button and our button utility class. This is looking pretty ugly, so inside our components folder, I'll create a new file called mobile-nav.css, and I need to import it inside our main.js. I'll import it under the footer.css, but above the utils.css. In our CSS, I'll select the parent div by its class name of mobile-nav. This is the div in our HTML that wraps the entire mobile navigation. I want our mobile navigation to be removed from the document so that it doesn't affect the other elements on our website. Currently, our mobile navigation pushed our hero section down, so inside our mobile-nav class, I'll give it a position of absolute. We see the position of absolute removed our menu from the document. I want the menu to be positioned at the top and left corner of the page. If I add a border of 1 pixel solid green, we see currently our menu is sitting in an awkward position. Under our border, I'll add a top of 0 and a left of 0. Now the menu is in the correct position. I'll add a Z index of 999 just to make sure our menu is above all the other elements. And I'll give it a width of 100% and a height of 100%. We could also use a height of 100 VH instead of 100%. However, I prefer percentages when they're an option because the VH unit tends to have some issues on mobile devices, while with percentages, there's never any issues. Under our height, I'll add a background color of dark, a display of flex, a justify content of center, an align items of center, and a text align of center. This is starting to look like a mobile menu. However, if we scroll down, we see we're in the About section. We could use a position of fixed instead of absolute, and we see when we scroll, we're still in our menu. This is fine, but later on with JavaScript, I'll be removing the scroll bar entirely when we enter our mobile menu. So I'll change the position back to absolute, although if you want, you can leave it at fixed, it doesn't really matter. The next element we need to style is the unordered list, so I'll select it by its class name of mobile-nav__menu and give it a list style of none. a padding of 0, a display of flex, a flex direction of column, a justify content of center, and align items of center, and a gap of 1 rem. I'll select the links by their class name of mobile-nav__link and give them a font size of small, a text decoration of none, a font weight of 600, a color of slate 600, a letter spacing of -0.05 m, and a transition of color 0.3 seconds. I'll reselect the mobile-nav__link with the hover pseudo class and give it the color of rose. Now when we hover over our links, they turn red. We aren't seeing our line, so I'll select it by its class name of mobile-nav__link-line and give it a border of 1 pixel solid slate 800 and a padding right of 1.5 rem. Our sun icon is also missing. I'll select it by its class name of mobile-nav__sun and give it a width of extra large, a height of extra large, and I'll give it a color of slate 600. If I open the developer tools and hover over our unordered list, you can see that the sun icon isn't centered in the middle of its container. This is because our sun icon is a button, and our buttons have a display of inline block by default. I can add a display of block to my sun, and now when I hover over it, we see it's in the center of its container. Our button is too big. I'll select it by its class name of mobile-nav__button and give it a font size of small. We don't need the green border anymore, so I'll remove it. Our menu looks perfect. Since this menu is designed only for mobile screens, we don't even need media queries. However, we do need to add some JavaScript to make the menu open and close when we click on the bars icon. Currently, I'm noticing that the bars icon is missing. I'll open my header.css file, and inside the header class, below the padding bottom, I'll add a position of relative and a z index of 9999. Now we see our bars icon. When clicking on this icon, it should open and close the menu. So inside our source folder, I'll create a new folder called utils. Inside the utils folder, I'll create a new file called mobile-nav.js. Now this video isn't a JavaScript video, but I will try to explain what's going on as best as I can without taking too much time for those of you that haven't had the chance to learn JavaScript yet. So what I want to do is have the mobile menu open when we click on the bars icon. I also want the bars icon to close the menu if the menu is already open. The first thing I'll do is inside the CSS of our mobile nav, instead of having a display of flex, I want it to have a display of none by default. This is because we don't want the menu to be open before we click on the bars icon. Back in our mobile-nav.js, I want to select the bars icon by its class name. The same way we would want to select it in our CSS to style it, we want to select it in our JavaScript to add logic to it. To select the bars icon, I'll use document.querySelector. Inside the query selector's parentheses, I'll add single quotes, and inside the single quotes, I can select any element I want. In our HTML, our bars icon is defined as a button with the class of header__bars. So inside the single quotes of our query selector, I can select the button by its class name using the same syntax we would use to select it in a CSS file, .header__bars. This line of JavaScript selects the bars icon by its class name, but we can't just leave it like this. We need to store it inside a variable. If we don't store the result of document.querySelector inside a variable, we would need to use it immediately. However, I don't want to use it immediately. Instead, what I want is to add logic to it further down in the file. So to store it inside a variable, I can say const header button is equal to our document.querySelector. The const keyword is used to create a constant variable. A constant variable is a variable that never changes and that can't be modified. If you don't know what a variable is, in a nutshell, a variable is a container or a box where you can store a value. A real-world example would be, imagine you're moving into a new home. You need to pack up your things. You can't just move without packing up. So to pack things up, you use boxes. You put your belongings inside boxes so that you can move them into your new home. Well, that's exactly what a variable is. It's a box we can use to put our stuff in. In the case of our JavaScript, I selected my bars icon by its class name. The bars icon is the thing I want to pack up before I move into my new home, so I store it inside a variable. And in this case, because we're using a constant variable, we're basically saying this box and what's inside it cannot be changed. You cannot change what's inside this box. It's a constant box, or in other words, it's a constant variable. It cannot be changed. There's other keywords for creating variables like let and var. I'll be using let later on, but var is outdated. I pretty much never use the var keyword unless I'm purposely using an older version of JavaScript. I want the bars icon to do something when I click on it. This is called an event, and to do something when something is clicked is called a click event. We want to add a click event to our bars icon, so what I can do is select the bars icon by its variable and add to it the add event listener method. The add event listener method takes two arguments, the type of the event and a callback function. We want the event type to be click, so inside single quotes, I'll say click. And then for the callback function, I'll use an anonymous arrow function. Now, I feel like I should explain a few things for those of you who haven't used JavaScript before. I can't go into details in this video, but to make a long story short, the document here is what we call an object. While we can create our own objects in JavaScript, this document object is an object that already exists in the JavaScript language. Inside the document object, there's a bunch of predefined functions. However, functions inside of objects are called methods. For example, the query selector method allows us to select any element from our HTML, and the add event listener method listens for events like when a button is clicked. We know a method is a method by the fact that it is called from an object using a dot and ends with parentheses. Here, we're saying I want to use the document object, and from that long list of predefined methods inside the document object, I want to use the query selector method. And the reason I can call the add event listener method on our variable is because our variable is equal to document.querySelector. The anonymous arrow function, unfortunately, is something that would take too much time to fully explain, but in a nutshell, the code that will go inside our arrow function will be executed once the bars icon is clicked. To make our menu open when the bars icon is clicked, I want to change the display of mobile nav from none to flex. To do this, I need to select the mobile nav by its class name in our JavaScript using document.querySelector. And inside the parentheses, I'll add single quotes and dot mobile dash nav. I also want this stored inside a variable, so I'll say const mobile nav is equal to our document.querySelector. Inside our arrow function, I'll select the mobile nav variable dot style dot display to select the display CSS property and is equal to single quotes and flex. The way this works is when the bars icon is clicked, we change the display of the mobile nav to flex. Now, when I click the bars icon, we see nothing happens. This is because we need to import this JavaScript code. To import our code, what I'm going to do is at the top of the file, I'll create an arrow function called mobile nav. And inside our new arrow function, I'll move all of our code inside it. Then at the bottom of the file, outside of the arrow function, I'll say export default mobile nav. Export default allows us to import our function inside main.js. So inside our main.js, under all of the CSS imports, I'll import mobile nav from /utils/mobile-nav. Because we're using a default export, I can call mobile nav whatever I want, but I'll leave it as mobile nav. The last thing I need to do is under the import, I can call and run the arrow function just like this. Mobile nav runs the code from our mobile-nav.js, and now when I click on the bars icon, we see our menu finally opens. However, we see we can scroll down the page. This is not something I want. So back in our mobile-nav.js, inside our callback function, and under the display of flex, I want to select the body and give it an overflow of hidden. To select the body, I need to use the document object. Then I can say .body, .style, .overflow y is equal to single quotes hidden. Now when I save and click on the bars icon, we see we get our menu and we can't scroll down the page anymore. The issue now is that we're stuck in our mobile menu. Clicking on the bars icon isn't closing the menu. I'm going to declare a new variable using the let keyword. I'm going to call it isMobileNavOpen, and I'll assign it the false boolean value. This variable, although just a regular variable, is also referred to as a state. I'll add a comment above our variable that just says state. State isn't something directly in the JavaScript programming language. It's more of a methodology. It's a concept or a way of thinking about data. It's where and how we keep track of the state or status of things. Often, state is defined inside objects. However, I'll just use a let variable because our use case is very simple. I just want a variable that keeps track of the state of whether the mobile nav is open or not. I set isMobileNavOpen to false because when we open our website, the mobile navigation shouldn't be open by default. This is our state. It's not open by default, so I set isMobileNavOpen to false. Also, we're using let instead of const to declare our variable. The main difference between const and let is that const variables, as I explained earlier, cannot be changed or mutated, and let variables can. Variables declared with let can be changed and mutated at any point. So for example, right under the isMobileNavOpen variable, I can select it and say it's now equal to true. Had this variable been a const, this reassignment of the variable would throw an error. If I open the developer tools on the console tab, we see we've got an error. So I'll remove this line and change our variable back to let. Then inside our event listener, I'll select our isMobileNavOpen variable and reassign it to !isMobileNavOpen. The exclamation mark here is called the logical not operator, and what it does is inverts the truthiness or falsiness of a value. So for example, our isMobileNavOpen variable is assigned to false. When I reassign it to not false, it becomes true. Because I added this reassignment inside the click event listener, when I click on the bars icon, our isMobileNavOpen variable state will go from false to true. To see this, I'll add a console.log of our variable right under our state, and I'll add another one inside the event listener. I'll save and open the developer tools. On the console tab, we see it prints false. It prints false because our isMobileNavOpen variable is set to false by default. And it's set to false by default because the mobile navigation menu isn't open by default when we arrive on our website. However, when we click on the bars icon, we see the console prints true, and if I keep clicking on the icon, the variable keeps switching to the opposite boolean value. This is how the logical not operator works, and because we're using it inside our click event, our isMobileNavOpen state will switch from false to true and vice versa every time we click on the bars icon. This is useful because now what I can do is add an if statement, open the curly braces, and move up our display of flex and our overflow y of hidden. I want this code to run when isMobileNavOpen is true. So inside the parentheses, the condition is going to be isMobileNavOpen triple equals true. Actually, instead of using triple equals, we can shorten our condition to just be isMobileNavOpen, and this works because of something called truthy and falsy. Having this condition without the equal operators will check whether the isMobileNavOpen variable is truthy. If I wanted to check whether the variable was falsy, I could prepend the logical not operator, and this would check if isMobileNavOpen was falsy. This is just a faster way of checking whether our state is true or false. Anyways, I want to say, if isMobileNavOpen true, then run this code. I'll also add an else statement, copy what's inside the if statement, and paste it inside the else statement. The else statement will run if isMobileNavOpen is false. So if it's false, I want the display to be none, and I want the overflow Y to be auto. Now I'll open the developer tools. On the console tab, we see we start out with false being printed. Clicking on the bars icon opens the mobile menu. We see true gets printed, and also, unlike before, when I click on the bars icon again, it closes the menu. We can remove our console logs. We don't need them anymore. There's currently a bug with our mobile menu. If I open the mobile navigation and click on About, for example, the page scrolls down, but we can't scroll back up or down. We're stuck here, and the menu remains open, hiding parts of the About section and all of the Hero section. We need the mobile navigation to close and the overflow Y to be set to auto when we click on any of the links on our mobile menu. To do this, I need to add a click event to our links the same way we added a click event to our bars icon. Under the mobile nav variable, I'm going to create a new const variable called mobile links, and I'll assign it a document.querySelectorAll of our mobile-nav__link classes. Notice we're using querySelectorAll instead of querySelector. This is because querySelector will only select an individual element, while querySelectorAll will select all of the elements with the class of mobile-nav__link. Had I used querySelector instead of querySelectorAll, querySelector would have selected the first element that had the mobile-nav__link class. But in our case, we want to apply JavaScript to all of the links at the same time, so we use querySelectorAll. Now, under our header button click event, I want to add another click event to our links. I can't just say mobile links.addEventListener like we did with the bars icon. It won't work, and I'll show you why. I'll console.log our header button, and I'll also console.log our mobile links. I'll save and open my developer tools. On the console tab, you can see the first thing that gets printed is our button element. The individual button element itself is being printed, which is why we can use the addEventListener method on it, like we're doing in our code. But the second thing that gets printed is our mobile links variable, and we can see it didn't print an individual element. Instead, it printed a node list with 3 anchor elements with our mobile-nav__link class. We also see that the node list is indexed like an array starting at the index of 0. To add an event listener to the anchor elements, we need to loop through our node list, similar to how we would loop through an array if you're familiar with arrays. Note that node lists aren't actually arrays, they're similar, but looping through them often requires us to convert the node list into an array. However, the for each method works on node lists, so we don't need to convert the node list into an array. So I'll remove the console logs, and under our header button click event, I'll select our mobile links variable and loop through it using the for each method. Inside the parentheses of the for each goes a callback function. For our callback function, I'll just use an arrow function, and inside the parentheses of our arrow function goes a parameter. We can call this parameter whatever we want, but this parameter will represent our individual anchor elements. So because of that, I'll call the parameter link. Also, because we're using an arrow function and we only have one parameter, we can remove the parentheses because when using arrow functions, parentheses for parameters are only required if you have more than one parameter. I'll open my arrow function and say link.addEventListener. The addEventListener method takes 2 arguments. The first is the event, which I'll set to click, and the second argument is a callback function, which I'll use an arrow function for. Now, just to quickly recap, our mobile links variable is assigned a querySelectorAll, which is different than an ordinary querySelector because querySelector returns an HTML element, while query selector all returns a node list. A node list is similar to an array, which requires us to loop through it to access the elements inside it. The link parameter inside our for each method represents the individual anchor elements inside our node list, which is why I can use it alongside the addEventListener method. This line of code, link.addEventListener, is applying an event to the first anchor element inside our node list. Then, because we have more than one anchor element inside our node list, the for each loop will run a second time, and this time the link parameter will represent the second anchor element inside our node list. Then the for each loop will run again one last time because we have 3 anchor elements inside our node list, and this time the link parameter will represent the third anchor element. In the end, all 3 of our links, the About button, the Work button, and the Contact button, will have the addEventListener method applied to them. Now I want to open our callback arrow function to define what we want to happen when these links are clicked. First of all, the only way to click on these links is if the mobile navigation is open. And if the mobile navigation is open, then that means we clicked on our bars icon. And if we clicked on our bars icon, then that also means that our isMobileNav state is true. Clicking on any of these links should close the mobile navigation, and if I don't change the isMobileNav state from true to false, then this will create a new bug when clicking on the bars icon. So the first thing I need to do is reselect our isMobileNav variable and change it to false. Then I want to say mobileNav.style.display is equal to none, because I want the mobile nav to close when I click on any of these links. And lastly, I'll say document.body.style.overflowY is equal to auto. This will restore our scroll bar and we won't be stuck in place anymore after clicking any of the links. Let's see if our component works. I can spam click the bars icon. It opens and closes our mobile navigation. I can click on the About link and we get sent to the About section. The navigation closes and we have our scroll bar. Let's try the other 2 links. It's all working. We're finally done with the mobile menu. The next thing we need to implement is the dark mode, light mode theme switcher. On our demo, when we click on the sun icon, the theme switches to dark mode if we're on light mode, or the theme switches to light mode if we're on dark mode. We've got 2 buttons that do this. The first one is our sun icon inside the header, and the second one is our sun icon inside the mobile navigation menu. They both do the same thing, but in our HTML, they have different classes. I want to select them in our JavaScript using the querySelectorAll method, and to select them using that method, they need to share the same class or the same ID. Because they don't share the same class name, what I'm going to do is give them both the same ID attribute. Inside the header element, I'll find the sun button and give it the ID attribute of theme-toggle. Next, inside my mobile navigation, I'll find the sun button and give it the same ID attribute of theme-toggle. Now that they share the same ID, inside my utils folder, I'll create a new file called dark-mode.js, and on the first line, I'll create a const variable called theme-toggle-buttons, and I'll assign it to document.querySelectorAll, single quotes, and hashtag theme-toggle. The hashtag is used to select elements with the ID attribute. The next thing we need to do, and this is the magical part that makes everything work, is open our style.css and copy all of our color variables. I'll find where I'm selecting the body element, and right above it, I'll create a utility class called light-mode. If you want, you can create this utility class inside the utils.css file, but myself, I want it above the body element. Although realistically, it doesn't really matter where you create it, I just like it above the body element. Inside the light mode utility class, I'll paste all of the color variables. I'll remove the rose and indigo variables because we're not changing them when switching the theme of the website. What I want is for dark to be light and for light to be dark. To do this, I'll rename the dark variable to light and I'll rename the light variable to dark. The light variable is now assigned a dark color, and the dark variable is now assigned a light color. We basically just switch them. On the slate colors, I want them all to have the color of slate 800, so I'll copy the hex value of slate 800 and paste it in the two other slate variables. The way this is going to work is if you look at the styles of the body element, we've got a background color of dark and a color of light. With JavaScript, I can add the light mode utility class to the body element, which as a consequence will redefine the variables to those inside the light mode utility class. So for example, if I go to my index.html and find the body element, it currently has no class, but if I were to add a class attribute and give it the light mode utility class and save, we see now our dev server has a light colored theme. And if I remove the class attribute from the body, we're back to using our original variables, which means we're back to our dark theme. Applying the light mode utility class to the body element doesn't just affect the styles inside the body element, but also affects all of the elements in our entire website that uses these color variables. By adding the light mode utility class to the body, we're basically overwriting the color variables by using the cascading feature of CSS. Variables inside the body has a higher specificity than those defined inside the root, which is why this works. Now, all I have to do is inside our darkmode.js, I'll select our theme toggle buttons, and because we're using query selector all, we know this variable is a node list, so I'll use the forEach method. ForEach takes a callback function, so I'll use an arrow function. ForEach requires a parameter, which we can call whatever we want. I'll call it button because our sun icons are buttons. Inside the ForEach, I'll say button.addEventListener. AddEventListener takes two arguments. The first is the event, and the second is a callback function. The event is going to be a click event, and for the callback function, I'll use an arrow function. Inside the arrow function, I'll say document.body.classList.toggle light mode. When we click on one of our sun icon buttons, this line of code will add a class to the body element, and the class it adds is our light mode utility class. Because we're using the toggle method, it will create the class attribute of light mode on our body element if it doesn't already exist. And if it does already exist, then it will remove it. Let's try it. On our dev server, I'll open the mobile navigation and click on the sun icon. We see nothing happens, and this is because we need to import our code inside main.js. To import this code, we need to wrap it inside a function. I'll use an arrow function called darkmode, and I'll move all our code inside it. Then at the bottom of the file, I'll export default our function. Inside main.js, under our first JavaScript import, I'll import dark mode from utils/dark-mode. Then I need to run our dark mode function. I'll run it underneath the mobile nav function. Now, when I try clicking on the sun button inside our mobile navigation, we see our theme switches to light mode. On our regular header, on large screens, when I click on the sun button, we see again the theme switches. So both of our buttons are working. The only issue we have is if the website is in light mode and I reload the page, the website doesn't remember which theme we were on and defaults to dark mode. By comparison, on our demo, when I reload the page while we're on light mode, it stays on light mode. This is because I'm using local storage to remember whether the user last left the website on light mode. While my demo is on dark mode, I'll open the developer tools, open the application tab, and find local storage. On dark mode, the key value pair is empty, and so when I reload the page, we come back to our website on dark mode. However, when I click on the sun icon, not only does the page change to light mode, but it also added a key value pair to our local storage. The key it added is called theme, and the value it added is light mode. If I reload the page, the website checks the local storage to see if theme of light mode exists. If the theme key does exist, then the website displays in light mode. By using local storage, users can leave the website on light mode and come back to it weeks later to find that the website remembered that they left it on light mode. When I go back to dark mode, the theme key value pair is deleted. Basically, we're only saving into local storage the light mode because dark mode is the default theme of our website, so there's no need to save dark mode into local storage. Let's implement this feature on our website. On our dark mode.js, this code adds a class of light mode to the body element when we click on either of the sun icon buttons. When I click on the sun icon, I also want it to create a key value pair in the local storage. I'll open the developer tools on our dev server, go on the application tab, and on local storage. We see there's nothing inside our local storage. When I toggle on and off the light mode by clicking on the sun icon, nothing happens in our local storage. So in our code, inside our click event, and under where we toggle on and off the class of light mode, I'll say local storage dot set item. Local storage is an object, and by using it, we get access to some of its methods. The set item method will create a key value pair inside our local storage. It takes two string arguments. The first is the name of the key wrapped in single quotes because it's a string, and the second argument is the name of the value wrapped in single quotes because, again, it's a string. I want the key to be theme, and I want the value to be light-mode. Now, when I click on my sun icon, we see in our local storage the key value pair of theme and light mode were created. However, we've got a problem. When we're in dark mode, our local storage should be empty. Currently, our local storage has the key value pair of theme and light mode, regardless of whether we're in dark or light mode. Inside my DevTools, I'll delete the key value pair. And then in my code, inside the click event and under the toggle of light mode, I'll add an if-else statement. I'll move the set item inside the if block, and inside the else block, I'll say local storage dot remove item. The remove item method takes one string argument, the key we want to remove from our local storage. We want to remove the theme, so inside single quotes, I'll say theme. We want to add the condition that will make sure we set item only when we're in light mode and remove item when we're not in light mode. Inside the parentheses of the if statement is where the condition goes. I'll say document.body.classlist.contains. The contains method checks if a specific class exists inside an element. It takes a string argument and returns a boolean. In other words, it returns true or false. Inside single quotes, I'll say light mode. Let's do a recap of what our code does. We're query selecting all of the elements with the ID attribute of theme toggle. Because query selector all returns a node list, we loop through it using the for each method. This loop runs this code twice because we only have two elements with the ID attribute of theme toggle. The button parameter represents one of the elements that has the ID of theme toggle. We could have named the parameter whatever we wanted, but because we know the elements that have the ID of theme toggle are buttons, I called the parameter button. When we say button.addEventListener, we're defining what happens when we click on one of our buttons. However, because this is inside of for each loop, we're actually defining what happens when we click on any of our theme toggle buttons. When we click on any of our sun buttons, the toggle method will either create or remove the class of light mode depending on whether the body element already has the class of light mode. Then it checks if the body element contains the light mode class. This returns a boolean. So if this condition is true, then we set theme of light mode in our local storage. And if the condition is false, then that means we should remove the theme key value pair from our local storage. Now on our dev server, when I click on the sun button, we see our local storage will add the key value pair of theme light mode when we're on light mode and remove the key value pair when we're on dark mode. Currently, when we reload the page, we always come back to the website on dark mode. This is because we're only adding the class of light mode to the body element when we click on the sun button. We need to give the body element the class of light mode, not just when we click on the sun button, but also when the page is first loaded. We also only want this to happen if inside our local storage, we have the key value pair of theme, light mode. So to do this, in our code, under the theme toggle buttons variable, I'll create a new const variable called theme, and I'll set it equal to local storage dot get item. The get item method takes in a string argument. It takes the key from a key value pair inside our local storage, and once the key is provided, it returns the value of that key. And if the key doesn't exist, then it returns null. We want to grab the value of the theme from our local storage, so for the argument, I'll say theme wrapped inside single quotes. Underneath the theme variable, I'll say theme and operator document dot body dot class list dot add theme. This is called short circuiting. The way it works is the AND operator is asking whether the theme variable is truthy. If theme is truthy, then we're allowed to run this next line of code. The AND operator here is acting almost like a barrier. It will only allow us to add a class to our body if the theme variable is truthy. Inside the add method, we're passing it the theme variable. Technically, I want to add the string of light mode to the class list method. However, the getItem method returns light mode as a string to our theme variable. So inside the add method, passing it the theme variable is the same as if we were to explicitly set it to light mode. Also, because this line of code isn't inside a statement, it runs the moment the page is loaded. This is called onMount. I'll add a comment above it saying onMount. OnMount means something that happens when the page finishes its initial load. OnMount happens when you first visit a page and also whenever you reload the page. I'll also add a comment above the theme variable because this is a state variable. Despite being a variable that can be mutated because we're using const, it's still a state. Under the short circuiting, I'll add a new comment called handlers. I'll create an arrow function called handle theme toggle. I'll copy the code inside the callback function of the event listener and paste it inside our handler function. I'll add a comment above the for each method called events, and I'll replace the callback function inside our event listener with our handler function. Now that I removed the callback function from our event listener and replaced it with a handler function, our event listener is now a one-liner. It doesn't have a block of code. Because our event listener is now a one-liner, I can remove the curly braces from the arrow function inside our for each method. The reason I can remove the curly braces from our arrow function is because with arrow functions, curly braces aren't required when you only have one line of code. Restructuring our code wasn't something we needed to do. The previous structure worked just fine. However, the current structure is much more readable. Readable code is most likely the most important skill a developer can acquire, perhaps even more important than performance. Any developer can open the darkmode.js file and right away understand what's going on. We select elements with query selector. This is our state. This is our onMount. This is our handler function. And this is our event. Furthermore, a developer doesn't even need to read the code. They can just read the name of the variables and functions to understand what they do. Our theme toggle buttons variable is obviously a list of buttons. Our state is obviously the current theme. This code, a developer will instantly understand that this happens when the page first loads. The handle theme toggle function obviously handles the logic for when the theme is toggled. You don't have to read the code. The name of the function tells you what it does. Then the event is also easy to read. The entire code in this JavaScript file is all easy to read. Make your code easy to read. It's very important. If you want, you can even refactor the code inside mobilenav.js. Our mobilenav.js already has state, but we could replace the callback functions inside the event listeners for handler functions. There's just one last thing I want to do with our handle theme toggle function. On my dev server, if I open the developer tools and look at the body element, it currently has no class attribute. That's normal. When I click on the sun icon, it adds a class attribute of light mode. Again, that's normal. However, when I turn off light mode, we're left with an empty class attribute. We could ignore this. It has no consequences, but personally, I'd like to fix it. All we have to do is inside our handle theme toggle function, inside our else statement, under the remove item method, I'll say document dot body dot remove attribute. And inside the parentheses goes the attribute we want to remove. We want to remove the class attribute, so inside single quotes, I'll say class. That's it. Now, when we look at our body, it'll only have the class attribute when we're in light mode. Actually, I'm noticing that in light mode, the color of the text in our buttons is not right. I want the buttons to always have white text regardless of the color theme of the website. To fix this, I'll open style.css and copy the hex value of the light color. Then I'll open utils.css, and inside our button utility class, instead of having a color of our light variable, I'll pass it the hex value of the light color. Now our button will always have a white text. We're really close to the finish line. We need to add lazy loading to our images. Currently, all of our images get loaded when we first load or reload the page. This is bad for performance. Why load images we can't even see? On my dev server, I'll open the console and go to the network tab. When I reload, notice how everything gets loaded at the same time. We see we've got all of our images in here despite them not even being visible to us. Now let's compare that to the network tab on our demo website. When I reload, you see we only have a few things being loaded, and as I scroll down, more images get loaded as they enter the viewport. This is called lazy loading, and there's a couple of ways to do it. However, in this video, I'll show you 2 ways of adding lazy loading to your website. We have the easy way and the hard way. The easy way of adding lazy loading is to simply add the loading attribute of lazy. In our HTML, I'll press Ctrl F on my keyboard and type the start of the image tag like this. I can close the search bar, and now I have the first image tag selected. With the image tag selected, I can press Ctrl F2 on my keyboard to select all of the images, and with all of them selected, I'll add the loading attribute and set it to lazy. Now all of our images will be lazy loaded. It's that easy. I'll just remove it from our first image because our first image doesn't need lazy loading. Images that are visible above the fold don't need lazy loading. Only images that are below the fold need lazy loading. By the way, below the fold means anything under the initial viewport, as in I have to scroll down to see it. Now, when I open the network tab on my developer tools and reload the page, we see we only have a few things being loaded, and as I scroll down, more and more images start getting loaded as they appear in the viewport. This is the easiest way to add lazy loading to our images. However, if you look at our demo, not only are images being lazy loaded, but as they're being loaded, they have a blur animation. This effect isn't something you can do with the loading attribute. This leads us to the hard way of adding lazy loading by using JavaScript and the intersection observer API. I'll undo the loading attributes of lazy on my images by pressing Ctrl Z a few times. Notice how by undoing our changes, it reselected all of our images. This is good because I want to add a few things to all of the image tags, except for the first one though, which I can unselect by holding the Alt key on my keyboard and clicking on the selection with my mouse. Now I have all of the images selected except for the first one, and none of them have the loading attribute of lazy. I want all my selected images to have a new class called lazy so that I can create select all of them inside JavaScript. If we look at our selected images, we see that the only image tag that already has a class attribute defined is the first image tag inside our About section. I'll unselect this image tag temporarily because it already has a class attribute, and on the other image tags, I'll give them the class attribute of lazy. Now I'll go back to the image tag in our About section and add to it the class of lazy. What I want to do now is for each lazy image to display a placeholder image instead of its actual image, because we want the actual image to be loaded when we scroll it into our viewport. For our placeholder image, I'm going to head over to Google, type placeholder image, and click on betterplaceholder.com. This website provides us with placeholder images, and to use it, all we have to do is copy their API URL, and then in our HTML, on the About Sections image, despite this image tag already having a source attribute, I'll add a new source attribute and paste in the placeholder image. I'll convert our original source attribute into a data attribute by prepending data dash. Data attributes are custom attributes we can create in our HTML. To create a data attribute, you just name it data dash and then whatever you want. You can call your data attribute whatever you want, and in our case, we call it source because we're storing the original route inside it. We're using this data source attribute to store the original route so that later in our JavaScript, we can grab the value inside it and push it inside the source attribute, essentially replacing the placeholder with the correct route. Looking at our dev server, we see our placeholder image isn't showing up. This is because we need to provide the size we want for our placeholder. I want the size of the placeholder to be the exact same size of our image, so in VS Code, inside the public folder, I'll click on about.jpg, and at the bottom right, we see the original size of the image. The size of this image is 720 by 720. So to provide this size to our placeholder, I'll add a slash at the end of the URL and say 720. We have our placeholder image. I want to do the same thing with all the other lazy images. I'll copy the placeholder URL and press Ctrl F on my keyboard. I'll search for image tags to find the images inside the featured section. I'll change the current source attribute into a data attribute, and above it, I'll add a source attribute with the placeholder URL we just copied. In my public folder, I'll find slayingthedragon.png, and at the bottom right, we see the size is 1920 by 968. Back in our HTML, at the end of the URL, I'll replace 720 by 1920 x 968. I'll copy the entire source attribute, paste it in the next image tag, and replace the original source attribute into a data attribute. I'll do the same for all the other images in this section. We've got 6 images left in the work section that also need a placeholder image. On project 1, I'll paste in our source attribute with the placeholder URL, but I need to change the size. I'll open waxmoney.png. Inside the public folder, we see the size is 900 by 900, so back in the HTML, I'll replace the size by 900. I'll also convert the original source attribute into a data attribute. I'll copy the entire source attribute again with the new size. I'll paste it inside the image in project 2, and I'll convert the original source attribute into a data attribute. I'll do the same for the remaining images. I can now create a new file inside the utils folder called lazy-loading.js, and inside it, I'll create a new const variable called lazy-images. I'll assign it to document.querySelectorAll, single quotes, and .lazy. Our goal here is to create a way of detecting when one of our images enters the viewport. So, for example, on our dev server, if I'm scrolled all the way up, we don't see the image in our About section because it's not in our viewport. It only enters our viewport when we scroll down. When this happens, when the image does enter our viewport, I want the browser to know about it. To do this, we can use the intersection observer API from the JavaScript language. To start using intersection observers, all I have to do is create a new variable. I'll create a const variable called observer, and I'll assign it to new intersection observer. Intersection observer takes 2 arguments. The first argument is a callback function. I'll use an arrow function. The second argument is an object for setting up some options. There's 3 options available. Root, which defaults to null. Root margin, which defaults to a string of 0 pixels. And threshold, which defaults to 0. The root option defines the parent element we want to observe. If I leave it at null, then the entire page will be observed. I want the intersection observer to observe the entire page, so I'll leave it at null. The root margin option adds additional space to be observed on the root, but because we have the root option at null, we can leave this at its default of 0 pixels. Threshold defines how much of the image needs to be visible before observing it. If I set it to 1, then the image would need to be 100% visible before observing it. I want the image to be observed the exact moment it enters the viewport, so I'll leave it at 0. Because I'm leaving all 3 options on their default values, I actually don't need to explicitly define them. I can remove them all and the entire second argument as well. Our callback function takes a parameter called entries, and inside our callback, I'm just going to console.log entries for now. To use intersection observers on my images, I'll select my lazy images variable, and because I'm using query selector all, I'll loop through our images with the for each method. For each takes a callback function. I'll use an arrow function, and I'll call the parameter image because we're looping through images. Inside our arrow function, I'll say observer.observe. Observer is our observer variable where we're defining our intersection observer, and observe is a method from our intersection observer that we can use to observe our images. I just need to add our image parameter as an argument to our observe method, and now all of our images are being observed. On my developer server, if I open my DevTools on the console tab, we see nothing was printed. This is because we need to import our code into our main.js. At the top of the file, I'll create an arrow function called lazy loading, and I'll wrap all of our code inside it. Then, at the bottom of the file, I'll export default lazy loading. Inside main.js, under the dark mode import, I'll import lazy loading from ./utils/lazy loading. Then under the dark mode function, I'll call our lazy loading function. Now on my developer server, when I open my developer tools and look inside the console tab, we see we've got an array with 15 items. This array is from our console.log of entries. The entries parameter is an array, and because we're observing all of our images with the class of lazy, our array has 15 items. Item 0 should be the image in our about section. If I open item 0, we see we've got a few key value pairs. If we look at the target, we see that item 0 is in fact the image in our about section, but perhaps the most important key value pair is the is intersecting, which is currently false. If I were to scroll down until the image in our about section enters our viewport and reload the page, we see is intersecting is now true. The is intersecting key value pair is what's keeping track of whether an image is in our viewport or not. So for example, if I remove the console log and say entries.forEach, because remember, entries is an array, so we need to loop through it. Inside our for each, we add a callback function. I'm going to use an arrow function. I'll call the parameter entry, and inside the function, I'll say if entry.isIntersecting console.log entry.target. So basically, we're going to be console logging the image element that is intersecting. Now, if I reload the page and look in my console, we see it's empty. However, if I start scrolling down, the moment an image enters the viewport, our intersection observer detects it, the is intersecting key value pair changes from false to true, and we print the target. Once I reach the bottom of the page, all of our images were detected and printed into the console. However, if I start scrolling up, the moment the images reappear in our viewport, they get detected again and printed into the console. We don't want this to happen. Once an image is lazy loaded, we don't want to keep reloading it every time it enters the viewport. But as it is right now, our images keep getting detected every time they enter the viewport. To stop our intersection observer from detecting the same image more than once, what we can do is add a new parameter to our intersection observer called observer, and then underneath the console.log, say observer.unobserve. The observer parameter is actually just a reference to the intersection observer itself, which gives us access to the unobserved method. The unobserved method does exactly what it says. It stops observing. We just need to tell it what we want to stop observing. Inside the parentheses of the unobserved method, I'll say entry.target. And now, when an image enters the viewport, the is_intersecting key-value pair will go from false to true. And when that happens, this condition in our if statement will be true, and the unobserved method will run, stopping future observation of that image. So let's test it out. I'll reload the page and open the console tab on the developer tools. As I scroll down the page, the moment an image enters the viewport, it gets printed into the console. Once I reach the bottom of the page, we see all of our images were printed into the console. However, this time, when I scroll back up, the images aren't being redetected and nothing further is being printed into the console. This is the behavior we want because it wouldn't make sense to lazy load an image every time it enters the viewport. The purpose of lazy loading is improving performance by loading an image one time the moment it enters the viewport. Now, what we need to do is when an image enters the viewport, replace the placeholder image in our source attribute for the route that we stored inside our data attribute. So if you don't remember, in our HTML, if I look at any of our images, we see that inside the source attribute, we have a placeholder image. And inside the data source attribute, we have the real image stored inside it. When we scroll down and an image enters our viewport, we want to grab the value inside our data source attribute and move it into the source attribute to replace the placeholder image with the real image. So to do this, I'm going to remove the console log inside our if statement. And inside the unobserved method, instead of saying entry.target, I'll create a let variable called image, set it equal to entry.target, and inside our method, just use the image variable instead. Then, to replace the placeholder inside our source attribute for the real image stored inside the data attribute, I just need to say image.source is equal to image.dataset.source. Now, when I scroll down the page, the moment an image enters our viewport, the placeholder image is replaced with the actual image we want to display. We've implemented lazy loading using the intersection observer API. The only thing left for us to do is add a blur animation to our images when they're being loaded. To do this, I'm going to open the utils.css file, and underneath the section utility class, I'll create two new utility classes. The first is going to be called loading, and the second is going to be called loaded. The loading utility class is going to be used when images aren't yet in the viewport. And once they enter the viewport, we'll replace the loading utility class with the loaded utility class. So for the loading utility class, I'll give it a filter property of blur 40 pixel and grayscale of 100%. I'll comment out the loaded utility class for now, and I'll head over to my index.html. I'll press Ctrl F on my keyboard and search for our image tags. I'll skip the image tag in our hero section because we're not lazy loading it. On the image in our about section, I'll add the loading utility class to it. Then in the featured section, I'll add a click at the end of the class attribute on each of the images in this section. And with all of them selected, I'll add the loading utility class to all of them. And lastly, in our work section, I'll add a click at the end of the class attribute on each of the images in this section. With all 6 images selected, I'll add the loading utility class to all of them. Now, when I look at our images in our dev server, we see they're all blurred out. I'll go back to my utils.css file and uncomment the loaded utility class. I'll give it the filter property of blur 0 and grayscale of 0. basically resetting what's inside the loading class. I'll also give it a transition property of 0.7 seconds and the easing function of ease in out. I'll go back to my lazy loading.js file, and underneath the image.source, I'll say image.classlist.remove. The remove method takes a string argument. We want to remove the loading utility class from our images, so inside single quotes, I'll say loading. The moment an image enters our viewport, we're removing the loading utility class. However, we also need to replace it with the loaded utility class. To do this, under our remove method, I'll say image.classlist.add. The add method also takes a string argument. We want to add the loaded utility class, so inside single quotes, I'll say loaded. And now, when an image enters our viewport, we remove the loading utility class and replace it by adding the loaded utility class. Now in our dev server, we see our images are all lazy loaded and they all have a blur animation while they're being loaded. Technically, our website is finished. There's one more thing we could do though to make our website look even better. If we take a closer look at our demo, we can see that the scroll bar is not the default Chrome scroll bar. It's actually custom made. Let's add this custom scroll bar to our website. I'll open style.css and go to the very bottom of the file. I'll add a comment saying scroll bar, and underneath it will go our custom scroll bar. I'm going to head over to Google and search for CSS tricks scroll bar. I'll click on this link and copy the code they provide. Under the scroll bar comment, I'll paste the code, and when I save, you see that the scroll bar on our dev server already changed. However, we can make it look even better. Instead of a width of 1 em, I'll replace it for 8 pixels. Then on the box shadow, I'll reset all of the values to 0. I'll change the background color to our rows variable, and I'll do the same for the outline. And there you have it. We've got our custom scroll bar. The website is finished. At the beginning of the video, when we were looking at the package.json file, I told you that I'd show you what the build and preview scripts do later on in the video. We've been using the dev script all this time during development for live changes in our dev server. In my terminal, I'll press Ctrl+C on my keyboard. This stopped our dev server, and if I try reloading the page, it won't work. Our development server was useful to us during development, but now that the website is finished, I'll run npm run build. This created a new folder called dist, and inside it is our source files. We've got all of our images, we've got the index.html, we've got a assets folder with our CSS, we see it's all minimized, and we've got all of our JavaScript here minimized. Vite not only minimized the CSS and JavaScript code, but it also did some optimizations like code splitting and caching. This dist folder is our production-ready code, and everything else is our development code. We know our code works in our development server, but we need to see if our production code works as well. To see if our production code works, in my terminal, I can run npm run preview and follow the link it provides. We see our website is working, dark and light mode is working, our images are being lazy loaded, and if I open the developer tools and resize the page, we see everything is responsive. Our production website works and has no bugs. Back in my terminal, I'll press Ctrl+C on my keyboard to stop the preview. Now what I want to do is push my code into a GitHub repository. You're going to need a GitHub account to do this. If you don't already have one, then you should go and create one. And if you already have one, take a moment to sign in VS Code using your GitHub account. You can see in VS Code in the bottom left, above the gears icon, there's a profile icon. When I click it, you can see I'm signed in with my GitHub account. I'm going to head over to github.com. I'm going to go in my profile and in my repository page, and I'll click on new. For the repository name, I'll say building a portfolio website, but you can call it whatever you want. I'll skip the description, and here you can choose whether you want your repo to be public or private. I'll have mine be public so that you guys have access to the code of this video, but if this is for yourself, you can set it to private. Next, I'll click on Create Repository. To push our code inside this repository, I can follow the steps that GitHub has laid out for us. I'll copy the first command and paste it inside our terminal. I'll press Enter, and we see this just created a README Markdown file for GitHub. I'll copy and paste the next command in our terminal. Getinit initializes a local Git repo for our project. I'll press Enter to run the command. Next, I'll copy and paste the next command in our terminal. However, this command adds files into our local Git repo. As it currently is, it's only going to add the README Markdown file. I want to add our entire project inside our local repository, not just the README file. So instead of saying git add README, I'll say git add dash capital A and press Enter. Git add with a dash capital A will add the entire project all at once. I'll copy and paste the next command inside our terminal and press Enter. This will commit into the master branch our changes. I'll copy and paste the next command and press Enter. Again, I'll copy and paste the next command and press Enter. And the last command is the push command. I'll copy and paste it inside our terminal and press Enter. This pushed our code into our GitHub repository. And now, if I reload the page, we see our repo and all of our code. Notice, however, how the dist folder is missing. This is as intended. Back in VS Code, we have a file called gitignore. And in this file, we define everything we want to ignore and not push into our repository. We see the node modules folder is in here, and so is the dist folder. Now to deploy our website to the World Wide Web, I'm going to head over to vercel.com. Vercel is where I'm going to deploy my website. It's free and absolutely amazing. Vercel and Netlify are both my go-to for deploying websites, whether they be static websites, Jamstack websites, full stack websites, it doesn't matter. I'm not even sponsored, I just love Vercel so much. I'm already logged in. If you don't already have an account, just create one or log in with your GitHub account. Like I said, it's free, and once you're logged in, click on Add New and select Project. Because I'm logged in to Vercel with my GitHub account, Vercel is detecting my GitHub repositories. On the repo I want to deploy, I'll click on Import. In this page, we can set the project name. I'll leave it as is. Vercel automatically detected that we're using Vite in our website and set up the build options accordingly. You see the build commands are correct, the output is correct, and the install commands are correct. Vercel set this up all automatically by detecting that we're using Vite. Had it not detected it for us, we would need to manually define what the build command is and what the output directory is. And for beginners, these are not easy questions to answer. Anyway, now I can just click on Deploy. Wait a few seconds until we finally get congratulations and some confettis. And there you have it, our website is live. I won't bother buying a domain in this video, but you can buy a domain if you don't already have one and set it up with your portfolio website. Now, if we want to make changes to our live server, all we need to do is go to our code and, for example, instead of having a dev server title, replace that with a proper title like portfolio website, save, and inside our terminal, I can git add dash capital A and press Enter. Then git commit dash M and add a description like change title inside quotes and press Enter. And lastly, just git push to push our code. This pushed changes to GitHub, but because our website is deployed using our GitHub repo, any changes we make to the repository will trigger a build command in Vercel that rebuilds our website using npm run build in the background, and after a few seconds, our changes are live. If I open our portfolio website and look at the title, we see portfolio website. The last thing I'm going to do is in our HTML, inside the head, for SEO purposes, I'll add a meta tag with a name attribute called description and a content attribute where I describe the website. I'll say my portfolio website. I'll add a second meta tag with a name attribute of keywords and a content attribute where I can add keywords for search engines. Doing this is not that important in all honesty, but I still personally like to do it. I'll just say web design, comma HTML, comma CSS, comma JavaScript. And lastly, I'll Control F and search for SVG elements. Our SVG elements are all icons, and on their parent element, we need to add an area label so that people using screen readers can read the icon. So on the button above the SVG, I'll add an area label saying theme, toggle, button. Then on the parent element, on the second SVG, I'll add an area label saying mobile, navigation button. On the parent of the third SVG, I'll add an area label saying theme, toggle button. And on the parent of the fourth SVG, I'll add an area label saying link to featured project website. Another thing you can do, which I won't bother doing in this video, is adding social media elements to the head. You can go to Google and search for CSS tricks, essential meta tags, and click on this link. In this page, you'll find some meta tags for different social media, which you can add to your HTML inside the head element. Now that we've made some changes to our HTML, we can push these changes into our terminal with git add -A, git commit -m, meta tags and area labels, and git push. Our portfolio website is finished. If you want to use it, feel free to do so and customize it to make it your own. I really hope this video was valuable to you, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to subscribe to the channel and maybe like the video, I'd very much appreciate it. You don't have to, of course. Also, feel free to join the Discord server. The link is in the description of the video. Much love and have a great day.